Chapter 104, Mr. Z. 1 pocket, 2 pockets, 3 pockets. Klein soon found a blood-stained wallet, a Deweyville library card, 2 pairs of brass keys, an unstuffed smoking pipe, a sheathed dagger, and a few letters that were folded neatly. Laying everything onto the ground except for the letters, he stood up straight and looked at the wallet. He confirmed that there were only 10 plus soldi and some copper pennies. The craftsmanship of the wallet is quite exquisite. It's such a pity. Klein sighed, feeling a little distracted. If I didn't spend so much of my private stash of money, buying a wallet would have been on my schedule today. After shaking his head, Klein opened the letters and quickly scanned through them. Dear Mr. Z, please allow me to defend myself. When Hans and I sold off the Antigonus family's notebook, it wasn't stupidity or betrayal. It didn't appear special in any way when it was in our hands. I suspect that it's alive and that it's a wicked item armed with a certain life and wisdom. It was something dangerous that needed to be sealed. At different stages and before different people, it shows different contents. This is a proven fact that I've learnt from the lamb in the police station. Although the notebook shows content that is sufficiently true each time with plenty of evidence, I believe that it would only reveal the completed content in the hands of a descendant of the Antigonus family. When Hans and I received it, we could only see some trivial matters of the Antigonus family, the general situation of the nation of the Evernight on the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range, and also the 3 sequence potion formulas we handed in to you previously. As you know, the secret order has the seer pathway in its grasp and possesses powerful tracking abilities, so Hans and I believed that it would be a risky move to continue keeping the notebook. The value it had presented to us wasn't sufficient for us to take the risk. Since we couldn't wait for your reply, we agreed amongst ourselves to sell the notebook to Welch, who was living on the same street. He enjoyed collecting relics and ancient books, and he could afford to pay a high price for it. As for the subsequent developments, you are already aware of it. This is the first thing that I'd like to explain. As I am writing these words, Hans is dead. He died due to a heart attack during his sleep. That must be a blessing from God, to prevent him from suffering the outcome of falling into the hands of heretics. I had no choice but to move to somewhere safer, more hidden. I didn't even dare to leave the house. Luckily, the lamb told me that the reason Hans was being eyed by the heretics wasn't because of the Antigonus family's notebook, nor was his identity exposed. It was just that he had taken in a silly female disciple in the hopes of slowly developing her into one of us. His female disciple had stolen a glance at his secret incantation and tried the magic divination while a Nighthawk heretic was watching. I believe you can pretty much guess the rest of the story, so there is no need for me to describe it. It's a pity that the position of the lamb isn't high enough, so the actual details cannot be determined. From various feedback, it seems the heretics have yet to suspect me. Their investigations came to a halt due to Hannah's sudden death. Therefore, I will return to the streets and plan to borrow a few more journal issues from the Deweyville library to seek out more clues. As a faction that also had the seer pathway in its grasp, the Antigonus family must have had some divinations regarding its decimation. They must have left behind secret treasures that would allow for the revival of the family. There's sufficient reason to believe that the treasure is hidden on the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range, which is in one of the relics in the nation of the Evernight. Having read that, Klein's pupils constricted rapidly. He nearly dropped the letter. The pathway that the Antigonus family had in its grasp was the seer pathway? What a coincidence! Thunder seemed to boom in Klein's head again and again that left him in a daze. He felt as though it was destiny. The notebook that led to the original Klein's death and indirectly helped me transmigrate originated from the Antigonus family that has the seer pathway in its grasp. The one that eventually made me choose the seer potion was the Emperor Rosel's diary, while Emperor Rosel was biased towards the seer sequence because of the mysterious Mr. Zeradal, who was the leader of the secret order, which also has the seer pathway in its grasp. This is like a suffocating net sewn by fate. What exactly is lurking behind all of this? Klein held the letter and paced back and forth. He needed to verify the contents with other sources. Yes, the secret order that the Zeradal family controls is pursuing and searching for the belongings left behind by the Antigonus family. If both parties shared the same beyonder sequence, there would be a sufficient reason and motive. Perhaps it is to bridge any missing sequences, obtain rare ingredients for a higher sequence advancement, or covet the other party's accumulated experiences in avoiding the loss of control. Going by this line of thought, it is rather reasonable that the Antigonus family has at least part of the seer sequence chain. Yes, when I was divining for clues pertaining to the clown potion, the images that emerged were mostly related to the Antigonus family. The only exception was the suited clown from the secret order. Therefore, the true meaning behind the symbolism is that each scene carries the possibility of obtaining the clown potion and a clue. However, I didn't understand the crux of the issue and regrettably missed it. With the two corroborating evidence, Klein nearly believed the matters that Sirius had brought up in the letter. He also understood why he constantly heard the words hornesis in the murmurs he shouldn't be hearing. The earliest occurrence of this happening was when I first consumed the seer potion. He wore a serious expression as he thought to himself. Meanwhile, he guessed that being a survivor of those that made contact with a relic of the Antigonus family and becoming a beyonder of the seer pathway were two necessary conditions to hear the murmurs saying hornesis. Is there really a secret treasure buried within the ancient ruins on the main peak of the Hornesis mountain range by the Antigonus family? No, I can't think about this. Just the notebook alone has killed so many people. Any complete treasure would be even more terrifying. Klein shook his head subconsciously and cast his gaze onto the third piece of paper, which was the last of the letters. Honorable Mr. Z, I hope I can gain your assistance. I believe that you should be sufficiently interested in the treasure too. Until then, I will make myself look like a normal person, a normal lover of history. When the end of days arrives, I will offer all of Tingin's lambs as a sacrifice to God. Humbly, Sirius Arapes. When he finished reading Sirius's letter, Klein had the urge to laugh. Why do I feel like I saved Tingen? What was this guy trying to do? Heretics are truly unbelievable. Who is this Mr. Z? He seems like someone in a high position. At the very least, he should be at the same sequence as Captain. Where was Sirius sending the letter to? He didn't write down the address. It seems like that's the cautiousness of a heretic. They wouldn't put the address on until the moment before they sent it out. Right? If the Antigonus family had the potion of the seer pathway in its grasp, then would the clown potion be among the 3 formulas inside the Antigonus family's notebook that Sirius sent? Highly likely. In that instant, Klein seemed to have found clues to the clown potion. Although Sirius didn't bring the formula along with him, it was possible that he had left some form of record at his hideout. He must have also had it in his head, in his memories. Klein looked at the corpse before him and considered the problem of making a dead person speak. It required almost zero consideration, as an idea immediately popped into his head. Mediumship. Spirit mediums could directly communicate with spirits that had yet to disperse. Seers, mystery priors, and others could roughly accomplish the same thing using ritualistic magic. Previously, when he was dealing with the corpse of the suited clown, there were 3 things that had kept Klein from using mediumship. Firstly, he was in a hurry to save the rest. Secondly, he didn't have the ingredients with him, and lastly, he lacked confidence. Thus, he didn't consider the option of mediumship and missed his best chance. When they returned to Blackthorn Security Company, the spirit was mostly gone. Even a spirit medium could only get superficial information. But now, Klein happened to have all the ingredients and tools, and he happened to have the experience of communicating with lingering resentment through the help of dream divination. My only concern about contacting the spirit of a heretic would be being placed in the same situation as Captain's entry into Hannah's dream where he saw a horrifying existence. However, Captain only remained frail for 2 days, and he wasn't considered severely injured. Yes, I could give it a try. He hesitated for less than 20 seconds before making a decision. He didn't want to miss out on this opportunity. He raised his head, turned around, and cast his gaze toward the spot where the window had shattered. There was a crowd gathered there watching. He took out his identification card and badge before returning to the broken window. He then told the onlookers through the shattered oriel window, "I am a probationary inspector from the Special Operations Department of the Alwa County Police. I have shot the criminal to death. Please take this badge to the nearest police station and tell them to send backup to deal with the follow-up. The rest are to help me cordon off this area. Do not allow anyone to come close, for they might contaminate the scene." "Yes, officer." The librarian that caused Klein the trouble quickly took the badge. When the entire scene was cordoned off and no one could enter the grass patch, Klein returned to the corner and stood by the side of the corpse. He was glad that the innocent crowd couldn't see the dead body, which looked more like a monster than a human. He put down his cane and revolver, then reached into the inner pocket of his windbreaker to take out a metal bottle. He was going to use the techniques of a mediumship ritual with dream divination to make the dead man speak. Chapter 105. Spirit Channeling. Klein twisted open the golden bottle's cap and brought it to his nose. He took a whiff of the stimulating scent that energized him. This was holy night powder made using slumber flowers, dragon blood grass, deep red sandalwood, mint, and other herbs. Since it was simple to concoct, Klein had made a batch the moment he got the ingredients from the underground market. It was going to be of use now. He poured a little of the holy night powder on his palm and collected himself. His irises turned dark. Next, Klein put away the metal bottle and scattered the powder onto the ground after infusing his spirituality into it. He scattered the powder as he walked, forming a circle around Sirius's corpse. A formless barrier rose, separating them from the outside world. Klein flicked away the remaining holy night powder on his hand and took out the other metal bottles. He sprinkled the Amantha Pure Dew and other liquids in the surrounding area. The ritual he set up was different from the one old Neil used at Ray Bieber's house, since the aim of the ritual was different. For example, old Neil poured the liquids before using the holy night powder. That could create a serene and holy state second only to an actual altar. Klein had used the holy night powder first before pouring the liquids to prevent Sirius's remnant spirituality from being disturbed by the surrounding objects, while still barely managing to have an environment that satisfied the requirements of the ritual. If he had used old Neil's method, the rest of Sirius's spirituality would have been purged, making it impossible to establish a connection. After finishing his preparations, Klein put away the materials and entered a state of cogitation. He recited the Hermes incantations softly. "I pray for the power of the dark night. I pray for the power of the mystery. I pray for the goddess loving grace. I pray that you'll allow me to communicate with the heretic spirituality inside this altar." As the incantations reverberated throughout the sealed space, Klein suddenly felt a massive, terrifying, and mysterious energy descend upon him. His eyes turned completely black, as though he had lost his pupils and the whites of his eyes. Seizing the opportunity, Klein recited a divination statement in his heart, the formula to the clown potion. The formula to the clown potion. As he was reciting the statement, he used cogitation to temporarily enter a dreamlike state. It was a hazy gray world without a sky or ground. Klein was unusually alert as he observed a transparent, ethereal figure. He extended his right hand and touched the remnants of Sirius's spirit. The scene in front of him changed with a rumble. It was a study table painted with dark red paint. There were 3 candles on a silver candle stand, as well as a blank piece of paper. Sirius had a pen in his hand. He wrote in lone language, "This is the second formula. Its name in the notebook is Clown. 80 milliliters of pure water, 5 drops of torn apple juice, 7 grams of black-rimmed sunflower powder, 10 grams of golden cloak grass powder, 3 drops of poison hemlock. These are the supplementary ingredients. The main supernatural ingredients are 1 crystal of the single horn of a matured Hornaceous gray mountain goat and a complete stalk of a human-faced rose." Sirius seemed to have the clown potion's formula memorized as he quickly finished writing it. He paused for a moment and took a sip of coffee. Then he unwound the silver pendulum around his wrist. He held the pendulum and closed his eyes, muttering terms to himself such as the end of days, peace of mind, hope for the Lord's blessings, and confess. After Sirius finished his prayer, Klein finally saw the pendulum clearly. Under the wound silver chain was a thumb-sized human figurine. The figurine had a single eye, a trait unique to giants. It was facing down, its legs bound by chains that connected upwards. At that moment, The single eye of the giant suddenly had a faint red glow. The scene Klein witnessed shattered as his legs buckled, almost causing him to kneel to the ground. Klein felt pain in his head as though he had been struck ruthlessly in the head with a bat. His vision turned blood-red as his hands involuntarily reached out to protect his knees. He recovered several seconds later and stood back up. He felt that his spirituality was unusually weak, as if he had heard the murmurings that penetrated his mind once again. But due to his progress in digesting the magic medicine, the adverse reaction calmed down quickly. The hanged giant, the true creator. Sirius and Hanas were both members of the Aurora Order, but the captain saw a huge cross in Hannah's dream. The terrifying being crucified on the cross wasn't the Aurora Order's hanged giant. Klein took 2 deep breaths and waited for his spirituality to slowly recover. The Aurora Order was a secret organization that sprang into existence about 200 to 300 years ago. They worshipped the true creator and symbolized him with the hanged giant. They believed that every human being had divine qualities, and as long as they persevered and made it through the countless trials, they would be able to accumulate enough divine qualities to become angels. According to the internal records of the Nighthawks, the sequence 9 of the Aurora Order was Secret's Suppliant. These Beyonders could sense the existence of mysterious and horrifying beings and were armed with a decent amount of knowledge regarding sacrifices and some knowledge on ritualistic magic. There was enough evidence to claim that Senior Secret's suppliants experienced distortions of their worldview and lost control easily. Little was known about the Sequence 7 which the Aurora Order had grasped. Sequence 8 was Listener. This was considered quite a terrifying job for a Beyonder. Every listener could listen directly to the whispers of the secret entities. Thus, they frequently came into contact with powerful, distorted, unique abilities. But consequently, if they were unable to advance, it was difficult for them to survive the next 5 years after becoming a listener. Furthermore, the comments the Nighthawks had in the reports were that every listener was a lunatic. Even if they looked normal on the surface, they were always crazy on the inside. The details of the report regarding the Aurora Order flashed through Klein's mind. His initial theory was that Sirius was a secret suppliant. From the description, secret suppliant are as hopeless as seers in battle. That does fit Sirius's actions just now. What happened later was a loss of control brought about by the injury. Yes, Fry once said that every Beyonder would more or less undergo some weird changes after they die. Klein thought as he tapped 4 points on his chest to praise the goddess. After his spirituality recovered slightly, he concluded the ritual with the appropriate procedure and dismantled the wall of spirituality. With a whoosh, a gust of wind blew as Klein forced himself to look at Sirius's corpse. He noticed that there was still an obvious wart on Sirius's mangled face. It was a dark purple wart, almost black. There seemed to be liquid and a light gleaming within. What kind of transformation was that? Klein rubbed his temples, not daring to touch it. He bent over and retrieved his cane, allowing it to bear his weight. After what had just happened, he knew that Sirius's spirituality had been completely destroyed. Even the spirit medium Daly would be unable to communicate with him. After a while, Klein saw Captain Dunn and his partners, Leonard and Kenley. It seems like your fate is tied to Beyonders and evil forces. In just a few weeks, you have come across more supernatural incidents than what we usually see in months, Leonard joked, looking at the corpse on the ground. It might not be a coincidence, Klein added, as he suddenly thought about the red chimney he had seen in his dream divination, as well as the majestic palace on the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range and the formless focus on him. He took the opportunity to mention it in passing. Dunn surveyed the surroundings and, with his gray eyes trained on Klein, asked, "You tried channeling his spirit?" There were still traces of holy night powder and the scent of the essential oils. "Yes," Klein replied truthfully. "I was worried that you would arrive late and that the remains of his spirituality would scatter. You don't look well. Are you all right?" The short Kenley asked in concern. Klein passed Sirius's undelivered letter to the captain and began from the beginning. "When I went to the underground market to purchase materials for the rituals, I suddenly remembered that Selena had also once gone to the Evil Dragon Bar and that it was Hanas Vincent that brought her there. This meant that Han-as was a regular there. Thus, I suspected that the person in the portrait, someone who's definitely connected to Han-as, might have gone to the underground market too. I asked the boss Swain about the portrait, and he gave me confirmation. He told me that the man had once tried to buy documents and items related to the Hornacis Mountains. That reminded me of the library. I recalled that the librarian had mentioned that someone had just returned the journal issue I wanted to borrow. Leonard stood to the side, listening with a smile. He suddenly interrupted. And so you brought your identification documents and badge here to flip through the borrowing records? Actually, I am very curious. Why would you come into conflict with this man here? Even if it was a direct encounter, with your style of doing things, you would have pretended that you didn't know him and would just leave the library. Then you would come to Zutland Street to ask for our help. Yes, there was no need for you to take the risk. As long as you confirm the target and that he hasn't left Tingen, there would always be a way to find him, Dunn added as he reviewed the letter. Klein immediately said in embarrassment. The librarian recognized him and shouted for the police to help. There's no way I could have pretended not to hear that. Leonard and Kenley looked at each other. One tried to cover his amusement, while the other turned his head to the side. Dunn nodded, his gaze leaving the letters. Did you get anything from channeling his spirit? I saw a pendulum that took the shape of a hanged giant. I saw a blood-red glow flash in the giant's only eye before I was forced out of the ritual, Klein described honestly. He didn't want to talk about the clown potion for the time being as he had two considerations. First, if Dunn and the rest were able to find Sirius's hideout and the corresponding records, then it would make no difference if he told them or not, as there would be no additional contributions attributed to him. Second, if Dunn and the rest were unable to find it, he could report it in the future. This way, he would be awarded with another contribution, allowing him to acquire the ingredients needed to concoct a potion. This was a way to obtain double the rewards for a single task, a technique that stemmed from old Neil's recent teachings. Aurora Order? Dunn muttered to himself before he asked some relevant questions. After Klein answered all his questions, he saw the fatigue in Klein's eyes and waved his cane. Not bad. You foiled a scheme that was targeting Tingen. You can go back and rest. Kenley, bring old Neil over. After giving out instructions, Dunn smiled bitterly and shook his head. Before Sequence 6, Beyonders of the Sleepless Pathway lack many supplemental abilities. We can only conduct the simplest of ritualistic magic. Captain, you mean that from Sequence 6 onwards, a Sleepless Pathway Beyonder would gain improvements in the corresponding aspects? Klein asked out of curiosity. Yes, Dunn confirmed. After leaving the Daffodil Street Library, Klein nearly fell asleep in the carriage on multiple occasions on his way back to Daffodil Street. He lumbered into the house. He then removed his hat and jacket before falling asleep on the sofa. Sometime later, he woke up abruptly, took out his pocket watch, and snapped it open. Melissa will be back in half an hour, Benson in 45 minutes. If I don't get up, I'll have to make them wait an hour before we can have dinner. Klein rubbed his forehead as he entered the kitchen. He washed his face with cold water, then took out the oxtail, tomatoes, carrots, and onions he had bought that afternoon. After he prepared the ingredients, he suddenly froze. He had the feeling that his actions just now formed a strange juxtaposition with the incident that afternoon. I am a man who just saved Tingen, Klein mumbled in amusement. He put on a white apron and got to making dinner. Chapter 106. Artist Klein after 8 in the evening, in the Moretti family's dining room. As he looked at the shallow soup left in the bowl, Benson raised his hand to cover his mouth to give a satisfied burp. Although that was our third time eating it, I still find it delicious. The sourness and sweetness of the tomato and the chewy texture of the oxtail blends into a perfect and unique flavor. Klein, I'm sorry that the Blackthorn Security Company caused Tingen City to lose such an outstanding chef. Melissa leaned backwards in her chair and nodded in agreement silently. This is because you have yet to try real cooking. Klein smiled humbly. If we have a chance in the future, let's head to Bonaparte Restaurant on Howe Street for some authentic Indus cuisine, and also to Coastline Restaurant in the Golden Indus Borough for some southern delicacies. These were restaurants that were always covered in the newspapers, where the average cost per person was around £1.50. I like your cooking more, Melissa answered without hesitation. Benson chuckled and changed the topic. But I ultimately feel that there's something lacking from the tomato oxtail soup. Perhaps it shouldn't be eaten with bread? Klein nodded in agreement. It's best complemented with rice. Rice, Melissa muttered with an expression of yearning. Tianjin, which was located north, wasn't considered a big city. Besides a few particular restaurants, it was difficult to have any chance of eating rice. To Benson and Melissa, this kind of food only existed in the descriptions of newspapers and textbooks. Looking at his sister's expression, Klein laughed. Wait till we save another 6 months' salary, and we will find a chance to go on vacation in Desi Bay and try the delicacies there. Desi Bay was located in the far south of the Lone Kingdom, and a third of it belonged to Fainapotter Kingdom. It had plenty of sunlight and beautiful scenery, and the paella there was very famous. Before Melissa could share her opinion on saving money, Klein said, in another 3 months, I should get another raise. By then, we could totally fulfill our desire to travel as well as save money for necessities. Why? Benson and Melissa's attention was redirected as expected. Klein coughed lightly and smiled while explaining, due to my professionalism, the police department which always collaborates with our company intends to hire me as their part-time history consultant. They would pay me extra, at least £2 a week. If you see me in a police uniform in the future and showing the corresponding police documentation, please don't be shocked. Of course, as you know, the work efficiency in governmental departments is as slow as a 90-year-old lady's footsteps. They still have to go through a lengthy procedure, and they're required to do a thorough inspection of me. Hence, on my off days for the next 2 months, I'll be heading to Koei University quite often to see my mentor and the teaching staff I know to learn more. Seeing the shocked look in his brother and sister's eyes, he paused and said with a strange expression, just like Emperor Roselle said, one is never too old to learn. Benson maintained a few seconds of silence before saying in a half self-deprecating and half emotional manner, is it too late for me to sign up for university? Knowledge really is wealth. And also power. Klein added silently. Benson, you need Klein's grammar books and his classic literature textbooks, Melissa said out of the blue, stealing the words from Klein's mouth. Benson's expression seemed to change. He gritted his teeth and said, Klein, pass me those books tonight. Even if all they do is put me to sleep, I am determined to read them for an hour and a half a day. I swear in the name of the goddess. If I can't do it, I will be a curly-haired baboon. A smile immediately plastered across Klein's face. No problem. The next morning, Klein hung his coat and hat on the clothes rack in the break room. Then he followed Roseanne's instructions and walked to the basement to the duty room outside Cheney's gate. Captain Dunn and members Fry, Sika, Royal, Leonard, and Kenley were all there. As his gray eyes glanced past the newly promoted Nighthawk, Dunn smiled and said, we have a routine meeting every Thursday to summarize past missions and discuss various challenges. I am a man who has endured the test of many regular meetings as well. Klein lampooned. He found a seat and joked, do I need to introduce myself? Dunn smiled and turned to look at Kenley. Briefly tell us about the investigation of Sirius Arapis. Kenley was also a Nighthawk who had been promoted from a member of the civilian staff. He wasn't very tall, his brown hair was quite thick, his body size was average, his muscles were very toned, and he looked like someone who was smart and capable. He thought and said, with old Neil's help, we found Sirius's secret hideout. There were many books and items at the scene. From them, we can be certain that Sirius was one of the underground members of the secret organization, the Aurora Order. He was also a secret suppliant. There's sufficient evidence to show that he and Hans Vincent sold the Antigonus family notebook to Welch. Those who don't remember Welch can ask Klein about him. We found valuable items, including 3 sequence potion formulas, which are Sequence 9 Seer, Sequence 8 Apprentice, and Sequence 8 Clown. The subsequent task is to use Sirius's social circle and the letters we found to locate other outer circle members of the Aurora Order. The focus of our search will be directed at the heretic who has infiltrated the police department. Also, people who were in contact with Hans need to be reinvestigated. Dunn nodded lightly and looked towards Klein. As you heard just now, We've obtained the clown potion formula, but are unable to determine if it's real. We have to wait for the Holy Cathedral to give us feedback. In the mission relating to the Aurora Order, you have made a crucial contribution. Plus, given that you shot a member of the Secret Order, it won't be long until you accrue enough contributions to be promoted. But I have to remind you that not everyone is like Daly. You have to suppress your desire and wait for 3 years. In order to avoid losing control, you can't allow your mindset to be affected by our discovery of the clown potion formula. Captain, you don't understand how magical it is to act. I have already confirmed the authenticity of the clown potion formula using divination above the gray fog last night. Klein nodded obediently. I will keep my emotions in check. Then Sikatron, the quiet midnight poet with white hair and black eyes, said, we still haven't found any clues regarding instigator Triss. I suspect that he has already fled from Tingen. After they were done exchanging their new information, Klein left the duty room and found old Neil to continue his mysticism lessons. In the afternoon, he went over to his combat teacher, Gawain, to do basic strength, endurance, and overall coordination training. With the sun still up and bright at 5, Klein took off his training costume, took a quick shower, and changed into his original clothing. He then took the public carriage to Basic Street. He hadn't forgotten about the red chimney that he had seen in his dream divination, nor did he forget about the man that he suspected to be a member of the psychology alchemists who had bought supplementary ingredients for the spectator potion in the underground market. These things would be inconvenient to investigate in his role as a Nighthawk. Number 27. Henry's Private Detective Company. Yep, it's here. Klein found a private detective company according to the newspaper's descriptions. It was said to be trustworthy. He put on a mask, lowered his top hat, and flipped up his collar. He walked up the stairs and came to the company on the 2nd floor. He knocked on the door that was half closed. Please come in, said a voice that seemed to be affected by phlegm. Klein lifted his cane and pushed the door to enter. He saw the detective company using an almost open layout. There were 4 employees sitting at their respective seats partitioned into small cubicles. Hi, I'm Detective Henry. How may I help you? A man in a white shirt and black vest greeted him. He held a smoking pipe in his hand, and he had a prominent jawline, blade-like eyebrows, and dark blue eyes that sized up his client. Klein used the collar of his windbreaker to block half of his face as he spoke. I have 2 matters to entrust to you. How are your rates? That depends on the difficulty of the task. Detective Henry retracted his gaze and pointed towards the sofa in the guest area. Let's talk over there. Klein followed him to the semi-partitioned area and sat on the single-seat sofa. He didn't take off his coat, nor did he take off his hat and mask. He purposely made his voice hoarse and said, First, I need you to help me find a house with a chimney that looks like this, as well as information on who the owner and current tenant are. As he spoke, he took out a neatly folded paper. When he opened it, there was a chimney with its color noted down and its surrounding scenery. This was the drawing that Klein completed by using the uniqueness of the area above the gray fog and the method of praying to himself. What a great drawing, Detective Henry complimented subconsciously. He then knitted his eyebrows and said, This is not complicated but very tedious. It would require a long time and a large amount of manpower. I understand. Klein nodded lightly. Detective Henry pondered for a moment and said, £7. The price for this job would be £7. In addition, you have to give me at least 2 weeks. All right. Second, help me find this gentleman and find out his identity. The only thing I know is that he occasionally appears at the Evil Dragon Bar near the Harbor Borough. And he must not detect any men you send. He is very sensitive and he has terrifying observational skills. Klein took out the second portrait. He intended to get in touch with a member of the psychology alchemists to see if he could find any valuable information and materials. For example, perhaps a formula that could be exchanged with justice? £3, such a mission would cost about £3 or £4. Your outstanding drawing skills will help my assistant and I save time, Detective Henry replied skillfully. £10 in total? Klein found the price upsetting. Detective Henry took a puff on his pipe and said, Yes, and you need to put a deposit of £2. When there's progress, you'll need to pay another £3 to £5. The rest of the payment can be made when the mission is completed. Then I shall come next week to check on your progress. Klein didn't haggle over the price to prevent the observant detective from remembering any of his characteristics. After they signed a standard contract, he took out 2 £1 notes and passed them to the detective. He only had £1 and 17 soldi left from his savings. As Detective Henry watched the man wearing a gauze mask and a black windbreaker with its collar raised leave in a hurry, he had a suspicious look in his eyes as he smoked his pipe. Why is he looking for a house that has that kind of chimney? He must be an artist, or at least a professional sketch artist of some sort. In the afternoon, in Viscount Glaint's luxurious mansion, Audrey, with her maidservant in tow, followed etiquette and passed her hand to the host. She looked at him, giving her hand a quick peck. "Your beauty accentuates my salon." Glaint first gave a compliment as usual. Then he lowered his voice and said, "That lady is already here. She's a beyonder and also an author." Chapter 107. Furs author? Audrey asked casually as she observed Glaint's reaction. Subsequently, she didn't have to mind the presence of her maidservant, Annie, since they chatted about ordinary topics. Glaint straightened his body and chuckled. "Yes, I believe that you have read her works in the past. She wrote the book, Stormwind Mountain Villa, which was highly acclaimed for the past 2 months. I enjoyed that book, especially The Calm Lady Sisai," Audrey replied with a faint smile. Meanwhile, she was rolling her eyes at her own hypocrisy inwardly. That was because her latest hobby had nothing to do with novels. She had stopped reading Stormwind Mountain Villa a month ago. Her progress stopped at the 1/3 mark. Ever since she joined the Tarot Club and acquainted herself with the powerful Fool, and became a real beyonder, she had been immersing herself in mysticism knowledge. She had been systematically learning about psychology and had lost interest in other activities. Smiling, Glaint guided Audrey to a sofa in the hall. "I am sure that Miss Furs Wall will leave a good impression on you, for she is just like Stormwind Mountain Villa's Lady Sisai, calm, intellectual, and lazy. Also, my dear Miss Audrey, are you going to play the piano for us later? That is the greatest compliment for a novel and literature." Audrey looked at the side profile of Glaint's face. His expression, tone, and body language all conveyed his intention to flaunt himself. "He wants to use me to show off," Audrey thought to herself, as if she had just met this good friend of hers for the first time. She maintained her elegant smile and said, "My music teacher, Mr. Vicanel the pianist, said that my standards have deteriorated recently and needs more practice." "All right." Glaint was just about wondering what to say when he suddenly saw a lady taking desserts from the long table. "Audrey, this is Miss Furs Wall, the author of Stormwind Mountain Villa." Audrey looked over. Miss Furs Wall was about 23 years old and 1.65 meters in height. She was wearing a pale yellow dress with frills. Her brown hair was slightly curly. She looked over with her pale blue eyes as Glaint introduced her while wearing a smile that appeared ruminative. Audrey had noticed several small details in the less than 3 seconds of observation. There are faint traces of yellow on Miss Furs's fingers. She likes cigarettes. There are obvious calluses on her fingers at spots used to hold a pen, fitting her identity as an author. Her arm movements show that she has decent strength. This is not a quality expected of an author unless she is passionate about exercising. Perhaps she was born like this, or she might have engaged in some other occupation in the past. She displayed her calm, rational, and precise style in Stormwind Mountain Villa. This must be linked to her previous occupation. Her eyes and emotions are relaxed, giving me the feeling that she is looking down on me and Glaint. Is this the psychological superiority a beyonder has over an ordinary human? If it was a coincidence that Glaint discovered her identity as a beyonder, then she should feel some anxiety and uneasiness. After all, she is unable to guess his reaction and what he would do next, since the unknown always brings about fear. This indicates that she was the one who voluntarily approached Glaint, having learned about our hobbies. She must be quite confident about what is going to happen next. Why would a beyonder approach Glaint? Does she need monetary support, or the beyonder ingredients stored in the treasury? Or perhaps she needs help with something? At this moment, Glaint was introducing Audrey to Furs. "Madam, this is the Miss Audrey that I mentioned previously, the most sparkling gem in all of Backlund. Her father is Count Hall, a trusted aide of His Majesty and respected member of the cabinet. Good afternoon, Madam Furs. Stormwind Mountain Villa is still seated by my bed to this very day." Audrey adhered to the rules of the aristocracy and curtsied. But she added silently, "That's because I haven't finished reading it even after a month." Furs returned the niceties simply and said, "Good afternoon, Miss Audrey. Your beauty sure leaves an impression. I think that I already have an idea for my next novel." Viscount Glaint said that you have exceptional talents in music." They merely exchanged praises as they were in public. After watching Furs continue towards the dining table as she targeted a cream cake, Audrey retracted her gaze and headed to the living room with Glaint. She recalled the details she had seen just now and tried to figure the motives of the woman. She wanted to gain some advantage in future conversations. As she took a step forward, Audrey, who was as calm as an objective spectator, stepped on her dress and nearly fell. At this moment, her personal maidservant, Annie, caught her, allowing her to maintain her grace. "Miss, the unique design of this dress means that you cannot walk too quickly," Annie pulled close to Audrey's ear and reminded her softly. "I know." Audrey nodded in reply, her face flushed red. "I was too absorbed in observing others that I forgot to look at where I was placing my foot," she silently complained in resentment. Audrey met with many other esteemed authors, critics, and musicians for the rest of the salon, always maintaining her sweet, elegant smile. Finally, after her facial muscles began turning sore, she saw Viscount Glaint's signal. She waited for a few minutes and gave the excuse of needing to use the washroom. She lifted her dress and stood up slowly to leave the salon. After confirming that there was no one tailing her, she made her way to the study on the first level and told her maidservant Annie, "I have something to discuss with Glaint. Guard the door for me. Do not let anyone enter." "All right." Annie didn't feel that the request was strange, for she knew that Audrey and Viscount Glaint shared similar hobbies and would often discuss mysticism in a private setting. Audrey entered the study and locked the door. She saw Glaint seated behind the desk while playing with a pen. Furs Wall was standing in front of the bookshelf, nonchalantly flipping through a book. "I'll introduce you both again. Madame Furs, a true beyonder." Glaint put down his pen and walked over. "Is that so?" Audrey intentionally exaggerated her feelings of doubt. Furs returned the book to its original position and turned around with a smile. "It looks like I have to prove myself." She walked over to the door and extended her right palm, grabbing the handle of the door. Suddenly, Audrey's vision blurred. It was as if she witnessed Madame Furs turn incorporeal as she passed through the door. She was shocked. Concentrating, she realized that Furs was no longer standing in her original position. A few seconds later, the door handle turned. The locked door was open just like that. Furs Wall smiled as she walked in from the outside. Audrey's maid, Annie, who was not far away, didn't seem to be aware of what had happened. "What a magical ability!" Glaint exclaimed. Audrey took in a deep breath and said, "I have no more doubts." At the same time, the ability Furs had displayed allowed Audrey to confirm what her true motives were, since acquiring money or materials would be no trouble for a beyonder like that. Glaint doesn't have any beyonder guards. Furs wants to use the statuses and resources available to Glaint and I to achieve something? Audrey tried her hardest to act as a spectator. Furs chortled and said, "Let us interact with honesty. We do not have much time left. I was once a doctor at a clinic and was given an opportunity to become a beyonder. That was more than 2 years ago. I hope that you can do something for me, and the reward I will give you is allow you to join the ranks of true beyonders. I will sell you the formula of a particular sequence potion and its corresponding materials." Upon hearing such a promise, Glaint could not help but ask, "What do you want us to do? I have a partner who's in jail now, awaiting the final verdict. I hope that you can save her, regardless of the methods used," Furs said simply. Audrey frowned. "Madame Furs, the abilities you have demonstrated should be better suited for the task." Furs laughed and shook her head. "No, that is not the case. She cannot pass through the places that I can. I can only go in regularly and chat with her. Also, I think that risking my life to save her is not a good idea. Life is short, but there is much for us to do. Audrey observed Firz's face and body language. She considered her words before asking, I understand. What crime is your partner being locked up for? Firz's expression immediately turned a little awkward. My partner is a very respected person who can make others comply from the bottom of their hearts. She is of good character and kind. It was that the means she used to convince a thug was a little over the top. After handing out the mission, Klein followed his original schedule of mysticism lessons in the morning and combat lessons in the afternoon. The regularity of his life almost made him forget that he was a member of the Nighthawks. The curse of often encountering supernatural incidents seemed to disappear as well. It was Saturday, his turn to guard Cheney's gate. You can enjoy the coffee I left here or the black tea in the clerk's office. Dunn surveyed the room with his deep gray eyes. Klein, who had already given an excuse to his siblings, nodded in joy. All right, Captain. You sure are a generous gentleman. Dunn laughed. Those will help you relax. Being tense all the time is not good for your health. He took his hat and cane and walked toward the door. As he was exiting the door, he suddenly turned around and said, I forgot to remind you, do not open Cheney's gate no matter what you hear, unless it is opened from the inside. Remember, no matter what you hear, no matter what happens. Captain, that's a little scary. Klein tensed up instantly. He felt the darkness of the basement triumph over the light of the gas lamp. Chapter 108. Deep into the night despite not being dawn yet, the well-ventilated but quiet and dark underground was illuminated by gas lamps. The dim yellow light emitted from the gas lamps were protected by glass, allowing them to steadily shine throughout the empty and quiet tunnel. Klein sat in the duty room and casually flipped through the newspapers, magazines, and books piled before him. He directed some of his attention outside, to prevent anyone from charging inside the Cheney's gate. His windbreaker and top hat were hung on the clothes rack near the entrance while his cane was leaning against the wall where it could be easily retrieved. The rich aroma of coffee filled the air, and Klein couldn't help but take a whiff. He massaged his temples to fight against the heavy head feeling he was experiencing and the weariness of his body. As a college student back on Earth, he often slept at 5 in the morning and woke up at noon, while staying up all night during the past 2 to 3 years of working life, to the point of being able to attend work energetically the next day. However, it was all thanks to the games that were too exhilarating, novels that were too interesting, television shows and movies that were too entertaining. This world obviously didn't possess any of the necessities needed for staying up all night. Seriously, Emperor Roselle. If you want to posture, do it properly. Pour your limited life into an unlimited enterprise. Lead the people of this world into the information age. Klein muttered silently. He could only console himself that there were at least newspapers, magazines, and increasingly interesting novels. At first, he wanted to focus on his studies to restrain his sleepiness. However, practically speaking, it conflicted with his duty. Once he entered that state, he would easily overlook any movements outside and any changes to the situation at the Cheney's gate. Phew. Klein picked up his coffee cup and carefully blew at it. He took a sip and let the fragrant taste swish around his mouth before letting the liquid slowly flow down his throat. Fermo coffee from the Paz Valley, very bitter but very refreshing. Klein gave a compliment and put down his coffee cup. The Paz Valley was located in the southern continent, a region that produced high-quality coffee beans. It was currently being fought over by the Intis Republic and the Lone Kingdom. They both built colonist settlements on the left and right banks of the Paz Valley and had destroyed the original Paz Kingdom. In the eerie silence, Klein casually picked up a magazine and realized that it was Ladies' Aesthetic, which talked about fashion and dating. This must be from Rosen, he murmured in amusement as he flipped through it with his interest piqued. Maybe it was due to the sudden advancement of camera technology in the past decade or so. Not only did the magazine use a lot of illustrations, it even used monochrome pictures as their content, just like the newspapers. They fashionably invited the famous play and musical actors to model the charms and the magical pairing of the clothing. In a short span of 7 years, The new regional Backlund magazine became a mainstream magazine that spread across the nation. The dress looks nice, she's pretty too. Klein flipped through it casually and didn't hide his aesthetic inclinations. He was a man that had matured normally both in body and mind. He had always appreciated beautiful ladies, but he had long set his goal, to find a way home. Hence, he tried his best to keep his distance from the opposite sex, so that he didn't waste the other person's time or leave behind any emotional baggage. As for streetwalkers, he was quite a germaphobe in that aspect. Benson and Melissa were already shackles that couldn't be removed. He could only find the means to make it up to them in the future. Klein suddenly felt his heart heavy and he couldn't help but let out a sigh. The further he strayed away from home, the more he felt melancholic during quiet late nights. He suddenly lost his interest in looking at beautiful women and put down the magazine in his hands. He picked up a novel instead. Stormwind Mountain Villa, author, Furs Wall. Klein read the content on the cover. The tranquil night, dim yellow light, and the leather-bound book reminded him of his younger days when he rented books. Hence, he continued to read simply because of nostalgia. Stormwind Mountain Villa was a novel about Lady Sisai, who was 165 meters tall and weighed 98 pounds. It was a story of her embarking as a home tutor in the Fruis Mountain Villa. 1 pound is about half a kilogram. Is this Jane Eyre of an alternate world? Klein caressed his fingers against the smooth paper as he began making guesses of the subsequent content. However, just as he thought it was a romance novel, an evil spirit emerged in the story. When he believed that it was a ghost story, Lady Sisai revealed herself as a detective and made a marvelous deduction. Just as Klein felt that it was definitely a detective novel, the main male character took a heavy blow to the head and lost his memory. Then, it became a heart-rending drama. In the end, it's still a romance book. Klein closed the book and drank a mouthful of coffee. Thump, 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 thump. A ferocious knocking was suddenly heard as it reverberated in the dim and quiet, empty corridor. Klein jumped in shock as he immediately turned tense. He instinctively drew his revolver from his armpit holster, adjusted the cylinder and hammer. Then, he slowly walked to the door and looked for the source of the sound. Thump, 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 bang, bang, bang. The thumping became more and more intense. Klein looked in the direction of the sound and saw the black outward-swinging gates that were engraved with 7 sacred emblems. Sounds from beyond the Cheney's gate? He squinted his eyes and his heart was beating like a drum. Bang, bang, bang. Klein saw Cheney's gate shake gently, and he sensed the massive impact it was withstanding. It can't be, right? I'm encountering something on my first day on duty? Did I get an unlucky constitution after I transmigrated? Klein's right hand broke into cold sweat as it held the revolver. Very soon he recalled the captain's instruction: do not open Cheney's gate no matter what you hear, unless it is opened from the inside. Could this be a normal phenomenon? Klein suddenly calmed down. Bang, 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 thump, thump, thump. The commotion beyond the Cheney's gate grew in intensity, but the heavy black metal gates only shook. Otherwise, it didn't show any unusual signs. This is normal. I nearly died from the shock, Klein muttered, before he prepared to return to the duty room. Just then he heard a sharp grinding noise. He looked at the heavy Cheney's gate bulging outwards as a crack appeared in its surface. Zing! In the jarring noise, Klein's almost fixed eyes saw a figure. Its height was about the length of a man's arm, and it was wearing a classic, black, miniaturized regal gown. There was an obvious stain on the gown. It had a not-so-exquisite face, black eyes, and tightly sealed lips. It was a cloth puppet, a toy cloth puppet. At that moment, when Klein was about to subconsciously raise his gun to take aim, the cloth puppet leaned heavily into the crack in Cheney's gate and unfurled the paper it was holding. There were many mysterious symbols on the paper, some that Klein knew and some that he had yet to learn. Together, they formed a vertical eye. Klein had yet to understand the situation when the regal-gowned puppet was suddenly dragged back by a shapeless force to the back of Cheney's gate. Cheney's gate closed once again, with no more knocking or pounding sounds. The basement regained its tranquility and silence as though nothing had happened. I have to inform Captain that Cheney's gate was opened from the inside. But it closed itself. At that moment, Klein's mental facilities returned to him as he felt alarm, fear, and doubt. A few seconds later, he recalled what the cloth puppet was. Since he was an official member of the Nighthawks, he was given the clearance to know about the Grade 3 sealed artifact sealed behind Cheney's gate. Number 0625. Name, Misfortune Cloth Puppet. Danger Grade 3. Considerably dangerous. It has to be used carefully. It can only be applied for operations that require 3 or more people. Security classification, official Nighthawk member or above. Sealing method, only needs to be separated from humans. Description: the cloth puppet is wearing a regal gown which was popular in around the year 1300. The gown has a stain that is almost impossible to remove. It is uncertain if the stain was present from the very beginning. In a few tragic cases of individual family financial crises recorded in Tingen, the police noticed the existence of the puppet. It was always placed in the children's bedroom, on the side table next to the bed. A few Nighthawks accepted the request and started an investigation on the puppet. The initial evaluation determined that it brought misfortune, causing people around it to be unlucky and find themselves in danger. Finally, they would die one after another. It only took 2 weeks for the tester to reach the brink of bankruptcy. The puppet isn't equipped with the capability to live. It doesn't have any inclinations of escaping the seal. Through extended periods of experimentation, we discovered that as long as one does not come within 10 meters of it for more than half an hour a day, one wouldn't be tainted with misfortune. If misfortune has befallen someone, the person will immediately have his situation turn for the better as long as the misfortune is transferred to another person. Appendix: the puppet first appeared in the house of an old lady, Tess, who lived in the lower street of Iron Cross Street. She was a toymaker. Due to old age and her husband's severe illness, with both her children passing on early, she had no choice but to move to the Iron Cross Street's lower street. This was the last toy she sold. She exchanged the puppet for some poison hemlock and ended her and her husband's lives, having starved for more than 3 days. As Klein recalled the information of sealed artifact 3-0625, he felt even more doubtful and horrified. Didn't it say the puppet isn't equipped with the capability to live? Didn't it say that it doesn't have any inclinations of escaping the seal? What did I see just now? What dragged it back in the end? The symbol that was drawn on the paper that it unfurled, what does it mean? That scene earlier was like how a psychotic murderer deals with his victim as the victim slams on the gates heavily and cries for help desperately, only to be dragged back. While these thoughts flooded him, Klein decided not to make any decision on his own. He returned to the duty room and pulled a rope. The rope tightened, the gear spun, and there was suddenly a hurried ringtone that rang on the second floor of the Blackthorn Security Company. Leonard Mitchell and the other sleepless who were playing cards in the entertainment room immediately put down their poker cards and ran to the basement. Chapter 109. Deduction: the sound of running footsteps entered Klein's ears, calming him down as he stood at the entrance of the guard room. Leonard arrived first, holding a revolver. He asked in a solemn voice, "What happened?" Watching Leonard struggle to stop, Klein suddenly thought of something that Rosen had mentioned in the past. 3 years ago, Leonard, who had just become a sleepless, tried to run down the flight of stairs despite not having adapted to the potion's power, causing him to fall and roll down. With a cough, Klein pointed at Cheney's gate and said, "There was a knocking noise from the inside, which then became a loud slamming noise. Then the door was pushed open a little." "Cheney's gate was pushed open?" the short Kenley asked in shock. "Yes, a slit was opened." Klein continued his description. He saw that Leonard, Kenley, and Royale had stopped approaching the guard room, instead forming an arc formation a few steps away, loosely surrounding Klein. He paused for a moment before asking, "Are you suspicious of me?" "No, it isn't suspicion. This is protocol." Kenley shook his head. In this tense atmosphere, Leonard maintained his flippant attitude, laughing as he added, "There have been incidents like this in other churches." The beyonder guarding Cheney's gate lost control and pulled the bell before killing 2 teammates who came to help. "All right." Klein no longer felt angry and aggrieved at being ostracized. Instead, he asked, "Then how should I prove that I haven't lost control?" Leonard wiped away his flippant smile and tapped his chest 4 times. With a hoarse voice, he recited softly, "Lacking clothes and food, they have no shelter in the cold. They are drenched by rains and huddle around the rocks for lack of shelter. They are orphans snatched from the breast, hope lost on them. They are the poor that have been forced off the proper path. The Evernight did not forsake them, but bestowed them with love." The holy, yet pitiful prayer reverberated around the basement, making the bodies, hearts, and souls of everyone present feel purified and tranquil. Seeing Klein not display any abnormal reactions, Leonard stopped his recital and smiled. "There's no problem. You are still our trusted partner." Madame Royale, who had been quiet all this time, looked at Cheney's gate and asked, "What did you see when the gate was pushed open?" "I saw a misfortune cloth puppet, the one wearing the black classic regal gown, 3-0625, Klein replied, still a little fearful. But 3 seconds later, a formless power pulled it back and Cheney's gate was closed once again. "What's going on?" Leonard, Kenley, and Royale exchanged looks. "Haha, we are in the same boat as you. We don't know the true cause. But since Cheney's gate is closed once again and there's nothing unusual, we shouldn't enter it at this time. We have to wait till dawn for the captain." Royale calmly added, "I will wait here and guard the gate with you." "All right." Leonard moved his hand and gave a bantering laugh. "As the most powerful person here, I shall stay too. Kenley, return to the 2nd floor just in case the police department has an emergency case and cannot open the door." Kenley didn't say much, he just nodded immediately and left. Leonard glanced at Klein and Royale. "Perhaps we can continue our card game? It's best to have some sort of entertainment in circumstances like this, to relax." "No problem." Klein adjusted his revolver and put it back into his armpit holster. Royale didn't voice an opinion, but instead stroked her smooth, black hair as she entered the guard room. While playing Fighting the Landlord, no, Fighting Evil, Klein said casually, "Misfortune cloth puppet, I mean 3-0625, according to its description, isn't equipped with the capability to live. Haha, 3 aces." Leonard showed his hand and replied with the same casual tone. "In the past 40 years, 3-0625 hasn't displayed any lifelike characteristics. We can first assume that the information is correct and make our assumptions based on that." "Pass." "You already have an idea?" Royale asked simply. As Klein hesitated to think about whether he should throw his 3 deuces, Leonard took a sip of his freshly brewed coffee and said, "Yes, since 3-0625 shouldn't have any lifelike characteristics, then its actions today must have been influenced by some other factor. This factor must also be rather recent, otherwise, we would have observed this phenomenon a long time ago. Has there been anything different about Cheney's gate over the last month?" Royale saw Klein toss his 3 deuces and pondered for a few seconds. "There is only one thing different. The Antigonus family's notebook and the sealed artifact 2-049 was stored behind Cheney's gate for a night." Leonard looked at the cards in his hand and as he tapped the table, he said with a smile, "If 2-049 can make the misfortune cloth puppet act abnormally, then something similar should have happened behind Backlund's Cheney's gate a long time ago. So I suspect that the problem lies with the Antigonus family's notebook." Klein thought for a moment and nodded. "That is the most likely explanation. Leonard, I never expected you to be this good at deduction. Typically speaking, being a romantic poet and a person with excellent deductive skills was mutually exclusive. That's because he's recently into detective novels," Royale explained indifferently. 2 kings, a straight from 8 to king. Does no one want it? 3 SXS and no more." Upon seeing this, Klein and Leonard fell silent. Having not been concentrating on the game, they forget something important. Royale was the evil in this round. Watching Royale cut the deck, Klein took the opportunity to ask, "Then what power pulled 3-0625 back?" Leonard glanced at him and chuckled. "Do you really think that the defensive mechanisms behind Cheney's gate only consists of the buried sealed chamber and a few elderly keepers? In reality, when the sun sets fully, the keepers would have already left Cheney's Gate and returned to St. Selina Cathedral. The power in the gate is strongest at night and is no longer safe for any living creature. The power only weakens when the sun rises again. That is also why the captain asked us not to enter Cheney's Gate no matter what we hear. In other words, the captain had forgotten to tell me the reason. Klein thought for a bit before asking, defensive mechanisms such as nexus formations? Like magnified versions of amulets and charms? Yes. Royale nodded as she stroked the edge of her cards. There is a reason that Cheney's gates are placed in the central cathedral of each city. The gate is maintained by the followers that go to these churches every day. Their sincere prayers allow a part of their spirituality to enter the nexus formations, and from small contributions comes abundance. I see, Klein nodded as he saw that he had a lousy hand. At that moment, Leonard laughed and said, "There isn't just one defensive mechanism behind Cheney's Gate. St. Selina's ashes are buried inside. She was a high-sequence beyonder when she was still alive." The ashes of St. Selina? Ashes of a high-sequence beyonder? Sacred ashes? What use do those have? Klein was as puzzled as he was curious. St. Selina was a devotee when the Church of the Evernight Goddess was being established. She was active during the Third Epoch and her deeds were written in many holy scriptures. Thus, St. Selina was a fairly commonly used name among the commoners who believed in the Evernight Goddess. Leonard seemed to read Klein's mind as he continued. Rumors suggest that the skeleton or ashes of high-sequence beyonders still contain incredible power. Of course, those are just rumors. Klein nodded, focusing his attention on the cards in his hand. There were no unusual incidents in Cheney's Gate for the next few hours, but Klein lost exactly 2 solely. It pained his heart, but Leonard, who fully expressed his romantic poetic vibes while playing, lost 4 solely and 5 pence, leaving Royale as the undisputed winner. The sun has just risen, it's my turn. The quiet author, Madame Sika-tron, entered the guard room at 6. Klein wrote the incident he encountered the previous night into the record book and returned to the Blackthorn Security Company with Leonard and Royale. He felt unusually exhausted, but the midnight poet and sleepless beside him remained energetic. This is the difference between the different sequences. Klein was just about to make his way past the partition and catch up on some sleep at home when he suddenly saw the captain enter. "Good morning, Captain." He couldn't help but yawn when he greeted him. Dunn, who was in a black windbreaker, took off his hat and looked at him with his gray eyes. "Good morning. You should head back home for some rest. Did anything happen last night?" Klein immediately gave a succinct summary of the incident regarding the misfortune cloth puppet and Leonard's deduction. Okay. Dunn didn't give his opinion. He concentrated on making his way to his office. "I will send a telegraph to the Holy Cathedral." Klein didn't stay any longer. He slowly walked out of 36 Sutland Street and breathed in the cool morning air. He felt a little more energized, suddenly remembering something he had forgotten all this time. "I forgot to tell the captain and the rest about the piece of paper in the misfortune cloth puppet's hands. How could I have forgotten? It was as if some power was influencing me, stopping me from telling this to the other Nighthawks. It has been some time since the Antigonus family's notebook was present at Cheney's Gate. The misfortune cloth puppet 3-0625 should have been affected long ago. Why did it only show abnormal behavior last night? Was it because it was the first time I was on shift at Cheney's Gate? It used all of its power to show me the picture on the paper? What is the motive of the Antigonus family's notebook? Has it got to do with my survival despite making contact with it? And that I became a seer? Many suspicions flashed through Klein's brain, rooting him to the spot. He was unsure if he should pretend that he didn't remember anything and make his way home to sleep, or head up and report it to the captain. Chapter 110, Confirmation. After thinking for a while, Klein decided to return home to confirm something. He believed that if the misfortune cloth puppet hadn't intentionally shown him the picture on the paper, then the captain and the rest would definitely find traces in their follow-up investigations. It wouldn't matter much if he reported it or not. If it were the converse, it was something worth careful consideration. That was also what Klein wanted to confirm. He took the trackless public carriage to Daffodil Street. When he returned home, his brother Benson and his sister Melissa had yet to wake up, since it was Sunday. The living room was dark and quiet. Klein boiled a kettle of water, threw in some tea leaves, and drank it with wheat bread. Then he took his coat, hat, and cane towards the stairs. He subconsciously lightened his footsteps to avoid making any loud noises. Just as he got to the second floor, he saw the bathroom door suddenly open, and Melissa, who was wearing an old dress, came out with a sleepy face. "You're home," Melissa was rubbing her eyes sleepily. Klein covered his mouth and yawned. "Yeah, I need to crash. Don't wake me up before lunch." Melissa tersely acknowledged when she suddenly recalled something. "Benson and I are going to St. Selena Cathedral pray and attend Mass in the morning. Lunch might be slightly later." As not-so-devoted believers of the Evernight goddess, she and Benson went to the church once a fortnight, while Klein, who was a nighthawk, hadn't entered the church since the last time he was followed by the member of the secret order. "No, I'm at the cathedral every day, just that I'm in the cathedral's basement." Klein justified himself subconsciously. He was currently most worried that the goddess would abandon him as a fake believer. If his ritualistic magic didn't respond at crucial times, he would be in big trouble. But then, when one considers old Neil, the goddess is quite forgiving towards the Nighthawks. That's right. Klein comforted himself. His scattered thoughts flashed past him, and he looked at Melissa. He nodded and smiled. "No problem. I can sleep longer then." Walking past Melissa, he entered his bedroom and locked the door behind him. Immediately following that, he psyched himself up and took out the ritual dagger and created a sealed spirituality wall. He took 4 steps counterclockwise while reciting the incantation and withstood the chaotic roars before appearing above the gray fog. In the illusionary boundless world, he was the only living spirit sitting on the seat of honor at the long bronze table. For nearly a minute of silence, Klein conjured a piece of goatskin parchment and wrote down a divination incantation. The picture that the misfortune cloth puppet displayed. Although Klein had seen the mysterious picture on the paper clearly for a split moment last night, he only managed to remember the rough shape of the picture due to his anxiety. But that wasn't a problem for a seer. He could reproduce anything he remembered and had seen once. According to mysticism theory, one's spirituality could remember everything they had seen. As long as they possessed the appropriate method, they could reproduce the scene whenever they wished. Klein even felt that the theory that Spirit Medium Daily described regarding the psychology alchemists made sense. Human memory was merely islands that were exposed above the sea. It couldn't withstand much. Hence, a person's spiritual essence remembered most of the information and turned it into the subconscious, which formed the entire ocean. While spirituality itself, even if it wasn't the entire ocean, also included the entire sea region surrounding the island. After reciting the divination incantation, Klein leaned backwards and fell asleep through cogitation. In the blurry, distorted, separated world, he saw Cheney's gate crack open once again as he heard the heavy grinding noises. The puppet in the black classic regal gown leaned into the opening of the door and unfurled the paper that it was holding. On the piece of paper, there were many mysterious symbols that collectively formed a vertical eye. Klein carefully observed the picture before exiting the dream. Then, with the aid of the uniqueness of the world above the gray fog and the memory that had yet to fade, he expressed the image on the brown parchment. The vertical eye looked up at him, looking both sinister and mysterious. Klein thought and wrote below the eye, "This is key to the treasure that the Antigonus family left behind." Putting down the pen, he untied the silver chain that was wound inside his sleeve. As he held it with his left hand, the topaz pendulum stably hung above the divination statement and the mysterious vertical eye. There weren't any obvious movements. Klein closed his eyes and recited the sentence with his mind cleared. After 7 times, he opened his eyes and saw the topaz spinning in small circles in a clockwise fashion along with the silver chain. That meant affirmation. The vertical eye picture is really key to the treasure that the Antigonus family left behind. Klein nodded in deep thought. He tapped his fingers on the edge of the long bronze table and muttered to himself, "Because of Ray Bieber's death, there are no descendants of the Antigonus family left. Hence, the notebook views me, the seer that interacted with it but remains alive, as its inheritor? It affected 3-0625 and left the key to the treasure with it, only to show it to me during my shift at Cheney's Gate? There doesn't seem to be any problem with the logic, but it still doesn't seem very convincing. How could the notebook be sure that there are no more descendants of the Antigonus family? And I am totally unrelated to that family. If I shared their bloodline, the original Klein wouldn't have committed suicide to begin with. It doesn't seem to matter if I tell this to the captain and the team. Let me look into this. Klein then divined the location of the Antigonus family's treasure. But, unsurprisingly, there was no detailed information. Just like in the letter that Sirius wrote to Mr. Z, Klein could only be certain that the treasure was related to the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range and the ancient nation of the Evernight. After he finished divining all the matters, Klein noticed that the crimson star from which he had previously heard prayers was producing a faint fluctuation again. He used the method of answering prayers and touched the illusory star. He saw the brown-haired young man who wore the unique black tight suit again. The young man was kneeling on the ground, facing the pure crystal ball, still muttering about something. Klein, who had purposely learned some Jotun, finally understood one of the sentences. Pray, father and mother. Really is Jotun? Where in the world is Jotun still used? That's an ancient antique that is thousands of years old. What a pity, the mysterious ruler above the giant is totally powerless. I don't have the ability to save them even if I want to. Klein shook his head and sighed. He decided to observe him for a little longer. I'll see what I can do when I master more Jotun vocabulary and can understand what happened to his father and mother. Klein retracted his spirituality, wrapped it around himself, and initiated a descent. When he returned to his bedroom, he dispelled the spirituality wall, changed into old but comfortable clothing, and laid down on the bed to get some sleep. Klein slept all the way till 12:30, which was when Melissa finished preparing lunch and came knocking on the door. After having a fairly sumptuous meal, he saw Melissa bring out her new dress and fishnet hat, looking like she was going out. "Do you still have something this afternoon?" Klein asked, puzzled. Benson was seated on the sofa, knitting his eyebrows at his grammar books. He didn't lift his head but answered on her behalf. Mrs. Shoud from next door told Melissa that there will be a lecture regarding family affairs in the municipal hall in the afternoon. Melissa plans to attend it and learn how to deal with daily household issues. Melissa nodded and said, "I got Selena and Elizabeth to join me." "That's nice. I hope that the lecturer tells you that a family like us needs to hire at least one maidservant," Klein joked. Noticing that Melissa was about to refute him, he immediately added, "We have to invest our limited time into more valuable matters." Melissa was stunned. After a while, she puckered her lips, put on her fishnet hat, and left the house. At 2 in the afternoon, Klein arrived at the Blackthorn Security Company again. Roseanne and Dunn Smith, who happened to be in the reception hall, asked in unison, "Didn't you go home and rest?" Klein smiled. "I was going to go to the divination club, but I kept thinking about what happened last night, so I decided to come over here first. Has there been any reply from the Holy Cathedral?" Dunn shot a glance at Rosen and turned around silently. He walked past the partition and entered his office. Rosen pulled her face at his back, then muttered angrily, "Seriously, Captain, well done." Klein complimented silently. He held back his laughter and followed Dunn into his office. Klein shut the door, and Dunn sniffed his smoking pipe before he said, "The Holy Cathedral has determined that the disturbance was because of the Antigonus family notebook, which they reclassified as a Grade 1 sealed artifact. It's a pity. That means that you no longer have the sufficient security clearance to read it. Grade 1. Highly dangerous. Only the ranks above bishops and Nighthawk team captains can know of the actual situation. That also means that Captain has no idea what's happening. Highly dangerous, no wonder." Klein felt regretful yet relaxed. Dunn gave him a glance and continued, "The Holy Cathedral told us to check if there are any other items behind Cheney's Gate that were contaminated by the notebook. After verification, only 3-0625 was abnormal, and we have already changed its seal. Did you discover anything else?" Klein pretended to ask curiously. Dunn shook his head. "No." Klein nodded in thought. He didn't continue with the topic. After some small talk, he bade farewell and left for the divination club to continue his journey of digestions. In the municipal hall, the three best friends, Melissa, Selina, and Elizabeth, sat near the door, waiting for the lecture to begin. If she delivers a bad lecture, we'll sneak out, Selina suggested excitedly. Elizabeth immediately agreed. Let's go shopping at Harrods. Chapter 111. Letting slip sometime later, the lecturer, who had relatively high cheekbones, walked up the wooden podium. She cleared her throat and said, "Good morning, kind, charitable ladies. I am Xaviera Hedda. What I am about to share with you today are my experiences in managing family expenses. There are 3 parts, the first being how a family with an annual income of £100 should balance food, housing, clothing, and employing helpers. The second would be where a family earning £200 yearly should be increasing their expenditure to appear more decent." Melissa listened attentively. She had her brother's annual income at her fingertips. It's already over £200, she thought, half in relief and half in fear. She was relieved and satisfied with her current life, but was also afraid that this way of life would vanish in the blink of an eye. At this point, the wine red-haired Selina covered her mouth. She told her 2 friends quietly, "She seems to be a believer of the Lord of Storms. She's wearing a windstorm badge." Melissa looked over and saw Xaviera wearing a badge depicting violent winds and tumultuous waves on her left chest. She quickly explained, "Mrs. Shoud, who told me about this seminar, is also a follower of the Lord of Storms. I don't think it's strange that the speaker is a follower too." "Yeah, I don't think there is a problem here. We are here to learn how to budget," Elizabeth concurred with Melissa. "But other than Melissa, we don't need to, nor do we have the right to govern our family's finances." Selina pouted. Elizabeth rebutted without hesitation, "But we'll get married eventually and form our own families." Selina had been a little afraid of Elizabeth after the incident of the demon mirror divination. She nodded in embarrassment and pretended to listen to the lecture attentively. The lecturer, Xaviera, raised her right hand and said, "The premise of any form of budgeting is to respect the opinion of the man of the household. They are the source of income, the pillar of the family. They face anxiety, stress, troubles, and disorder in society in order to obtain everything for us. Thus, we have to create a serene home, one free from troubles from the outside. This will allow them to relax when they come home, allow their souls to be cleansed, allow them to be more prepared to face the challenges to come." So, as the famous philosopher, sociologist, humanities scholar, and economist Mr. Loomy once said, "A woman is the angel of a household." Selina stroked her cheek and traced her dimples as she whispered with a little excitement, "Loomy, the person who said that humans are born free?" Elizabeth hesitated before answering. "Yes, but he is a believer of the Lord of Storms." At this point, the lecturer, Xaviera, continued, "Mr. Loomy also informs us that females are innately flawed when it comes to intelligence and logic. In that case, unable to judge for themselves whether they should accept the judgment of father and husband as that of the church." Melissa, Selina, and Elizabeth looked at each other, speechless, after hearing such a description. "Let's go?" Selina finally suggested. Melissa and Elizabeth nodded. "All right." They took their veiled hats and bent over, sneaking over to the side door in an attempt to leave without attracting any attention. When they cautiously arrived outside and could finally stand up straight, they suddenly heard a burst of applause coming from the small hall. Melissa instinctively looked back into the hall. She saw Mrs. Shoud as well as many other ladies clapping. "Phew! Praise the lady!" Melissa exhaled. She left the uncomfortable place together with Selina and Elizabeth. "Shall we go to Harrods?" Selina suggested as she stood under a tree. She had already forgotten about what had just happened. Melissa fell silent for a few seconds before saying, "I plan on returning home to study." "Study?" Selina fiddled with her wine-red hair, as if she had returned to her regular life. "Also, I have to buy bread, beef, potatoes, and fruits. Klein needs to work today. Benson went to the municipal library. So, yeah, I have to go back." Melissa suddenly realized how much she loved her textbooks, her gears and springs. Selina decided to keep her distance from the unusually weird Melissa. She turned to look at Elizabeth and smiled dutifully. Shall we go to Harrods together? Even though I've spent all my savings, it's still wonderful to window shop. Sure. Elizabeth accepted the suggestion, then asked casually, Melissa, does your brother, Klein, have to work on Sundays? Yes, he rests on Mondays, different from ordinary jobs. Melissa unknowingly raised her head slightly. After leaving the Blackthorn Security Company, Klein took a public carriage to Howe Street. He tried his hardest to suppress his emotions, to not think about the issue of the Antigonus family's treasure. He tried to focus his attention back onto the matter of acting. It was important to fully digest the potion as soon as possible. Improving himself was extremely important no matter when it was. Acting as a seer, I'm not professional enough. The fortune tellers back in the Footaholic Empire had to go through the almanac all the time before they accomplished anything. Klein held his cane as he sat inside a carriage. He had decided to divine if it was beneficial for him to travel to the divination club today. That was more befitting of a seer. As he was getting off the carriage, Klein took out a halfpence coin. His field of vision narrowed, his pupils becoming darker as he silently recited, "It is suitable to head to the divination club today. It is suitable to head to the divination club today." Ding. Klein flicked the coin up. He didn't look at the rotation of the coin, calmly extending his hand instead. Thunk. The halfpence landed in the middle of his palm. This time, the number 1/2 was facing up. With the number facing up, that means that I would encounter an unfortunate incident at the divination club today. Klein thought for a moment before he turned to the opposite side of the street. He waited for the public carriage that was headed for Daffodil Street. He felt more and more like a charlatan. Howe Street, at the entrance to Harrods department store. Selina was just about to enter the building when she suddenly froze and looked to the side. Did something happen? Elizabeth asked, puzzled. Selina puffed her cheeks and said, Elizabeth, I thought about my mysticism teacher, Mr. Vincent. He passed away just like that, the morning after my birthday. Could it be because I peeked and used his secret incantations? I've always felt guilty and uneasy because of this. Besides, I've been rather unlucky recently. So? Elizabeth asked quietly. Selina bit her lips and said, I wish to do a divination at the divination club over there and see if Mr. Vincent's death had anything to do with me. From what happened at my birthday banquet, I have this nagging feeling that Elizabeth is hiding something from me. I remember the back of the man in a tuxedo. Can't you divine it yourself? Elizabeth asked in surprise. Selina sighed, imitating her father. Sigh, I cannot divine it given my current condition. All right, let's head to the divination club first. Elizabeth agreed to her friend's suggestion. They headed over to the side and made their way to the divination club on the second floor by following the stairs. Hello, good afternoon, Miss Angelica. It's a pleasure meeting you again. Selina gave a lively greeting at the reception area. Angelica smiled and said, You should be able to find me here as long as you come after lunch. Selina exchanged niceties before lamenting Hanas Vincent's death. She then said, I need to have a divination performed. You know the rules of the club. Here is the list of members willing to do it. It's the weekend, so most of our members are here, Angelica explained like clockwork. Selina and Elizabeth huddled their heads together as they scanned the list of names and description together. I used to just ask for my teacher directly. To think that the club would have this many members willing to do divinations compared to last year, Selina said excitedly. Suddenly, she paused for a few seconds and said in puzzlement, Klein Moretti? Klein Moretti? Isn't this name the same as Melissa's brother? Elizabeth froze. She looked repeatedly at the name Klein Moretti and nodded. That's true. Miss Angelica, is this Mr. Klein Moretti around? Selina asked with a sparkle in her eyes. Angelica shook her head. My apologies, Mr. Moretti didn't come to the club today. All right, we'll find someone else. Selina didn't mind not seeing the person, but she laughed at her friend. I know that this can't be Melissa's brother, but having seen this name, I naturally thought of a newspaper, a headline worthy of the Intis Press. The Intis Press was created by Emperor Roselle, famous for its attention-grabbing headlines. It was one of the most famous newspapers in the northern continent. Elizabeth asked inattentively, "What headline?" Selina cleared her throat and said, "Is it the decay of morals, or a problem with society?" History graduate actually ends up doing divinations over the weekends to make a living. Chapter 112. Azek's Explanation. Backlund, Empress Borough. Audrey Hall sat on a suspended chair in a windy corner and looked at the flowers that were blooming under the sun. She thought of Furs Wall's request. According to Viscount Glaint, there really was a young girl named Zio Dericha being impounded at a temporary prison located in Backlund's North Borough. She was charged with grievous assault against a decent gentleman due to a financial conflict. She caused the man to be bedridden, and he might not be able to stand on his feet ever again. Regarding that, Furs's explanation was that the gentleman wasn't a nice person but the head of a gang in Backlund's East Borough. He made a living by being in usury. The cause of the incident was when one of the borrowers found out that the interest was several times higher than he expected, so much so that it was impossible to return the amount of money even after he bankrupted himself. When his discussion with the gentleman ended fruitless, he found the famous intermediator, Zio Dericha, hoping that she could persuade the other party to waive the unreasonable portion of the loan. That gentleman didn't respond well to Zio Dericha's attempts at arbitration and even threatened to capture the borrower's wife and children that night. Hence, Zio Dericha switched tactics and chose to use physical means. Accidentally, she caused severe damage to the man. Viscount Glaint investigated the matter and confirmed that Furs Wall was telling the truth. He also confirmed that the gangster had lost control of his underlings. Moreover, after a midnight visit by someone, the borrower's debts were waived. A statement was sent to the prosecutor to plead mercy for Zio Dericha. However, an assault case of such severity wasn't dropped even when the victim decided not to pursue a trial. Glaint wished to solve the problem through normal means. He sent people to talk to lawyers that he was familiar with, but they were only confident of winning a lighter sentence. But it would be very difficult to acquit her from the crime unless she obtains a medical certification stating that she is mentally incompetent or mentally undeveloped. Audrey muttered to herself, leaning in support towards her friend's opinion. To her, it was best to not have any relationship with Furs Wall and Zio Dericha. Ever since the Tarot Club, Audrey felt that she was no longer an innocent and naive young lady. Tomorrow night, there will be a dance at Count Wolf's residence. I should tell Glaint then to act according to the lawyer's suggestion. Audrey nodded slightly as she made a decision. In the Lone Kingdom, lawyers were either barristers or solicitors. The latter didn't need to be involved in court affairs, and were responsible for gathering evidence, talking to the parties involved, setting up wills on their client's behalf, supervising property allocation, and providing legal consultation. Of course, they could also represent their clients to attend the most basic magistrate court and defend simple cases. Barristers, on the other hand, were responsible for researching evidence and defending their clients in court. According to the Lone Kingdom's laws, they had to maintain an objective attitude so they couldn't make direct contact with the litigant. They could only communicate with them through their assistants, who were solicitors, to gain complete understanding of the situation. They were all true law experts who possessed outstanding communication skills and were skilled in debate. The relaxed Audrey observed the colorful flowers outside while hidden in the darkness when she recalled something. Medical certification stating she was mentally incompetent. Psychiatrist? If the psychology alchemists have grasped acting, does that mean that they can be found amongst psychiatrists? Audrey felt that her train of thought was on the correct path, and her eyes shimmered like a lustrous gemstone. Just then, she saw her golden retriever, Susie, sneak behind the flower bushes, to a spot where only the gardener would be able to reach. Susie, what is she doing? Audrey hid in the shadows and looked in a daze. The golden retriever's sense of smell seemed to be confused by the flowers all around her that she failed to notice her owner behind her. She opened her mouth and produced sounds that was akin to one's exercising of their voice. Then, it caused the surrounding air to vibrate into words that were jerky and unmellow. Hello. How are you? Audrey's mouth widened as she completely forgot about the etiquette an elegant lady should have. She couldn't believe the scene before her and the stiff voice that she had just heard. She suddenly stood up and asked, "Susie, you can talk? When did you learn how to talk?" The golden retriever jumped in fright as she turned around to look at her owner. She shook her tail nervously and very quickly. She opened and closed her mouth a few times, vibrating the surrounding air. "But I don't know how to explain. I'm a dog after all." Upon hearing that, Audrey was suddenly at a loss for words. Monday morning, Klein followed his plan to revise and consolidate his mysticism knowledge. Then, he took the public carriage to Koei University. He wanted to increase his interactions with Mr. Azik and find out exactly what he knew. In the 3-story gray building of the history department, Klein and his teacher, Cohen Quinton, chatted for a while and exchanged their information regarding the historical ruins on the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range. Having not learned anything new, he seized the opportunity to enter the office diagonally opposite when his mentor left to handle certain matters. He then walked over to Azik's desk. The lecturer had stayed behind to take care of some matters. "Mr. Azik, can I have a chat with you?" he asked the man with the tan skin, gentle facial features, and the small mole below his right ear. He took off his hat and bowed. With eyes that seemed to have seen the vicissitudes of life, Azik tidied his books and replied, "Sure, let's take a walk by the Kois banks." "All right." Klein held his cane and followed him out of the 3-story gray building. Along the way, they maintained their silence. Neither of them spoke. When the flowing river water entered their vision and there were no teachers or students passing by, Azik suddenly stopped in his tracks. He turned his body halfway, faced Klein, and asked, "Is there something I can help you with?" Klein remained silent for a long while, thinking of several tactful ways of asking his questions, but he gave up on all of them. Therefore, he spoke frankly and directly asked, "Mr. Azik, you are a trustworthy person, a respectable gentleman. I would like to know what you can see in me, or should I say, what do you know?" "I am referring to the previous incident when you said that there was something disharmonious in my fate." Azik put down his cane and sighed as he laughed. "I never expected you to be so straightforward. I'm quite at a loss how to answer you. To be frank, disharmony in your fate was the only thing that I could see. Other than that, I don't know any more than you do." Klein hesitated and asked, "But how could you tell? I don't believe that this was derived from divination." Azik looked sideways towards the Koei River. His intonation was tainted with some bleakness. "No, Klein, you don't understand. Divination can reach that kind of level. It only depends on the person doing the divination. Of course, my divination was merely an excuse. Some people are special. They are born with some strange ability. I think I am someone like that." "You think?" Klein acutely caught the word that the other man used. "Yes, I am not sure if I was born with it. Perhaps, the price of my ability is to forget myself, to forget my past, to forget my parents." Azik's eyes were clouded with melancholy as he looked at the river. Klein was increasingly confused. "Forget the past?" Azik smiled without any humor. "Before I entered the Backlund University's history department, I lost most of my memory. I only remembered my name and some basic knowledge. Luckily, I still had my identification documents. Otherwise, I probably would have ended up homeless. All these years, I've tried to search for my parents using my identification documents, but I never found anything, even though I could see a corner of fate. During my few years in the university, I gradually realized that I possessed some strange but unique powers that go beyond common sense." Klein listened attentively and asked, "Mr. Azik, why did you lose your memory? No, I mean, did you find out why you lost your memory?" He suspected that Mr. Azik was a member of the life school of thought who had lost his memories, and that he might even be a mid-sequence beyonder that held an above-average position. It was a secret organization that had potion sequences for monster and soothsayer. It was an organization that was mainly passed down through master-disciple relationships. Azik shook his head vigorously. "No, it felt like I just had slept. I've forgotten everything that happened in the past." He walked forward a few steps with his cane in his hand. He spoke as he walked. "After I left Backlund, I started dreaming. I dreamed about a lot of strange things." "Dreams?" "I am good at interpreting dreams." The conversation was entering Klein's domain of expertise as he immediately asked, "What kind of dream?" Isaac let out a muffled laugh and said, "Many different kinds of dreams. Sometimes, I would dream of the internals of a dark mausoleum. I would dream of ancient coffins with corpses in them. They would have white feathers growing out from their backs. Sometimes, I would dream of myself being a knight covered in armor, holding a 3-meter-long spear while charging towards the enemy. Sometimes, I dream of myself as a feudal lord, having a rich and fertile fief, with a beautiful wife and 3 children. Sometimes, I dream of myself as a tramp, walking on a muddy road in the rain, feeling cold and hungry. Sometimes, I dream of myself having a daughter, a different daughter than the previous children. She would have long, smooth black hair, and she enjoys sitting on the swing that I made. She always asks for sweets from me. Sometimes, I dream of myself standing next to the gallows, looking towards a dead body hanging up there coldly." Listening to Isaac raving like a madman, Klein suddenly realized that he couldn't interpret the dreams because his various dreams symbolized opposite, contradictory things. Isaac retracted his gaze as his voice no longer sounded ethereal. The Feynapotter kingdom in the south believes in Mother Earth, and the Church of Mother Earth promotes a belief. They believe that every life is a plant, absorbing the nutrients from the earth, growing slowly, prospering, and withering. When they wither, these lives fall to the earth and return to the mother's embrace. In the coming year, they grow again. They would blossom then wither, year after year. Life is as such, one life after another. Sometimes, I am very willing to believe in this concept. I believe because of my uniqueness, I can dream of previous lives, and the lives before that. At this point, he looked at Klein and said with a sigh, "I haven't mentioned any of this to Cohen before. The reason I'm telling you is because Isaac paused and smiled. "I apologize. My description earlier was not precise enough. The disharmony in your fate is not the only thing that I could see. I can also see another thing. Klein, you are not an ordinary person anymore. You possess an extraordinary, strange power, one very similar to mine." Chapter 113. Request Mr. Isaac can tell that I'm a beyonder? His ability is truly powerful. Klein froze for a moment before he gave an honest reply. Yes. He thought for a while before adding, "Because of what happened to Welch and Naya?" "It's as I thought," Isaac sighed. "There were 2 people with extraordinary powers amongst the group of police that came to question me and Cohen. It was probably Captain and Leonard. They were in charge of Welch's case." Klein nodded slightly, not interrupting Isaac. Isaac raised his cane and said, "You should have entered their circle. I hope that you can help me search for clues of my origin. You do not need to go out of your way to do it, just note it down if you find any clues." Upon saying that, Isaac wore a bitter smile. "I don't know any other person with extraordinary powers. You cannot imagine what emotions a man without a past has. You are like a boat floating in a vast ocean. The most terrifying thing is not facing a storm, but not being able to find a harbor. The inability to navigate to shore. All you can do is take on disaster after disaster, with no end in sight, never to feel peace and safety. No, Mr. Isaac, I know how it feels, for I am in a similar position. Fortunately for me, I have the memory fragments of the original Klein, as well as Melissa and Benson." Klein answered silently before he asked, "Mr. Isaac, why didn't you join a similar group when you possess such magical ability and search for clues yourself?" Isaac looked into Klein's eyes and let out a self-deprecating smile. "Because I'm afraid. I'm afraid of death." He sighed and continued, "I have gotten used to life like this. I like my life. I don't have the courage to take that risk, so I can count on you." Klein didn't say any more. He promised, "I'll pay special attention if I come across any clues." "All right, we should return to the office. Let's have lunch together with Cohen when he's done with work. Do you remember? The East Balham restaurant in the university is quite good. My treat." Isaac lifted his cane and pointed to a direction. "My apologies, I really have no memories of that. How could the studying original Klein have afforded the East Balham restaurant? Even if Welch was treating, he would still reject going to such an expensive place. Klein pressed on his hat and returned to the third level of the grayish stone building which housed the history department with Isaac. A few steps later, Isaac suddenly spoke. "I'll be on summer break after I finish settling all my work at the university. You can visit me at my house or write to me." Klein nodded and said casually, "Mr. Isaac, I thought that you would head to Desi Bay for a vacation." "No, it is too hot in the south right now. I don't like the so-called sunbathing. Look at my skin color. It tans easily. I'd rather head to the winter county, to the north of the Fasak Empire to ski, sightsee, or hunt seals." Isaac, who had a copper skin tone, smiled as he replied, "I would too." Klein, who had just joined the Nighthawks, revealed a look of envy. After lunch, Klein returned home and took a nap before beginning his revision and study of charms and amulets. He hoped to grasp them quickly to create objects that could at least be used in battle and help him. When it was approaching 3 in the afternoon, Klein packed his stuff and sealed the room with a wall of spirituality. In the majestic divine hall above the gray fog sat a long, ancient mottled table. Klein sat at the seat of honor, his face enveloped by the thick fog. He looked at the still obscured justice and the hanged man as they appeared at their designated seats. Miss Justice's emotions doesn't seem too stable. Worry, unease, and a little lost. Klein observed the only female member of the tarot club with his spirit vision. Words couldn't describe Audrey Hall's emotions. She was extremely shocked by Susie's sudden speech. She had imagined a future with herself as a great detective or famous psychologist bringing along her assistant Susie, but if that became the dog detective Susie bringing along her assistant Miss Audrey, then it would be a little. No, not a little, it would be straight up weird. It leaves me lost. Audrey suddenly sat up straight. She wanted to request for Mr. Fool's and the hanged man's help. But she swallowed the words she was about to say. How should I ask this? What should I do if my pet is abnormal? How should I interact with a pet that can speak, one that has decent intelligence? No, this is the Tarot Club, not an experience sharing on pets. I bet that the good impression that the hanged man and Mr. Fool have of me would shatter if I ask those questions. Audrey's mind whirled. Finally, she organized her words and said, "Honorable Mr. Fool and Mr. Hanged Man, who has helped me all this time, I have a question to ask. What can a pet with beyonder powers do for its owner? In other words, how useful is it?" She had just said her piece when she noticed Mr. Fool and the hanged man slip into silence. The atmosphere became a little weird. Hey, say something, don't look at me with those eyes, I did nothing. Really, I was asking for a friend. Audrey wanted to burrow into a hole out of shame. She deeply regretted asking that question. Considering that she had previously asked what would happen if an ordinary animal consumed a sequence potion, did she share the potion she formulated with her pet? That seems like something only Miss Justice would do. I feel a little pathetic being the boss of a heretic cult with her as a member. Klein lifted his right hand and propped it against his forehead and pinched it twice without giving an answer. The hanged man Alger Wilson was silent for nearly 20 seconds before he replied in a strange tone, "That depends on what kind of beyonder powers the pet has. For example, if it's a spectator, then it can help you observe or listen in on certain occasions. As you know, most humans are wary of each other, but would never suspect that a pet would be eavesdropping on them, even if the pet was sitting right by their feet. It makes sense. Father would avoid me when discussing important matters with the nobles, cabinet members, and other ministers. They would often lock the door to the room. But if Susie could hide long enough to be locked in with them, then she wouldn't be chased away. Also, many ladies like to interact within private social circles. Audrey had a sparkle in her eyes as many thoughts welled in her mind. Also, since Susie can speak now, she can tell me the content of the meetings directly. Susie is great. I have to treat you well. I have to teach you proper pronunciation and vocabulary. Should I teach Susie the aristocratic pronunciation or a more normal Backland accent? Would other dogs pick up on where Susie comes from when they interact? Wait, why am I considering this? Susie wouldn't use human language when interacting with other dogs. Wait, Mr. Hanged Man, why did you use spectator as an example? See, could you have guessed what happened? Audrey's expression changed. She regained her posture and smiled. Mr. Fool, I found another page of Emperor Roselle's diary. I got this from Fur's wall. Great, you have repaid what you owed, Klein replied in a good mood. I am sorry, but there's not much content on this page of the diary. Audrey was conjuring the content she remembered onto the piece of goatskin. Klein raised his hand and made the goatskin parchment appear in his palm before saying, That doesn't affect my promise. Furthermore, the parts of the diary you handed me previously had 2 pages. The pages collected by Justice and the Hanged Man were not originals. They were copied by researchers. Some would copy it on one page for recording purposes, while others kept the original look of the diary for convenience. Klein looked down at the few lines of text on the page. December 20th. A new year approaches, but the feedback I received is making me very confused and troubled. There is no crude oil in this world. There's no crude oil to be found. Chapter 114. The Standards of a Member No Crude Oil? It couldn't be found for some reason, or there really wasn't any available. From the period Emperor Roselle was assassinated till this day, about 150 years have passed, and there are still no traces of crude oil. Klein's pupils constricted as his hand quivered while holding the diary. No crude oil not only meant that the future of the internal combustion engine became uncertain, it would also lead to a state of stagnation in the chemical industry. In other words, Earth's modern industrial age would never transpire here. In short, the development of this world was uncertain to Klein. Although he couldn't invent things, he had assumed that he was still at an advantage because he knew a bit of everything and could foresee the direction of technological development. When he saved enough money, he could make a risky investment on an industry that he thought showed promise. Furthermore, he wouldn't put all his eggs in one basket. Klein thought that it was only a matter of time until he could own enormous wealth. By then, he would hire the so-called white gloves as representatives to establish international charity foundations. On the surface, they would provide relief to the poor. In reality, they would actually be establishing and funding a revolt in order to fight against the higher strata of society and enhance the living standards of the people in the lower class. If he were to find a method of returning to Earth, he would segregate his property. 1/3 to Benson, 1/3 to Melissa, and 1/3 for his foundation. However, it was a pity that his perfect vision of the future was instantly half-shattered. Luckily, there's still electricity and magnetism in this world. The telegram is a successful example. I should mainly invest in this in the future. Klein settled down and read down row by row. December 21st. I'm no longer thinking about crude oil anymore. Upgrading my sequence level is what matters. December 22nd. The filthy environment in Richelieu is unacceptable. If I hadn't visited incognito, I might have never known that it still looks the same as when I was young. I want to gather all my ministers and formulate a capital sewer and public toilet enhancement plan. I have to rectify the people's bad habits. Let them boil hot water for consumption, wash their hands and faces frequently, don't litter, don't pee and poop anywhere, use condoms if possible. I thought of what to name this campaign. The Patriotic Health Campaign. Hence, the invention of the condom has to be brought forward. There's also masks, paper cups, and others. Yes, even the most primitive version would do. Give it a try. I have to thank this world for they still have rubber trees. December 23rd. Perhaps I should consider that suggestion. Keep a back door for myself outside of the Church of the God of Craftsmanship. For example, I could join that ancient and mysterious organization which influences the world from the shadows? Klein then suddenly realized that there was nothing else at the bottom. His emotions were indescribable. Emperor Roselle? What was the name of the ancient and mysterious organization that was influencing the world from the shadows? Do I know it? How could you stop here? Why didn't you write more? It's just like when I used to read novels. When I read till the end and realized that the author ended up dropping the novel. And Patriotic Health Campaign? The Emperor sure knows how to have fun. The contents of the diary should have been written after he became the consul of the Intis Republic. He might already have called himself the Emperor Caesar. I have to read some books when I get back and flip through some historical texts of other countries. I have to see which year the capital sewer and public toilet enhancement plans took place. After his nearly 20 seconds of silence, Klein reined back his thoughts and let the diary in his hands vanish into thin air. You can start your discussion now. Audrey let out a breath of relief and adjusted her state to become a spectator. She smiled faintly and said, I'd like to know if there are any sequence potion named Tribunal, or a kind of beyonder that can go through wooden doors or make locks ineffective? I know about this. Enveloped in the grayish-white fog, Klein was going to reply, but the hanged man answered first. I need you to help me investigate something in return for the answer. What is it? Audrey asked with interest as well as with puzzlement. Alger glanced towards the fool and said, I'd like to know if the king has the intention of taking revenge on the Faesac Empire and launching a new war on the east coast of Balam within this year or before June of next year. The Tarot Club was currently using the Loan language, which was confirmed by the trio's accents at the first gathering. Hence, Alger knew that Miss Justice was a noble in the Lone Kingdom, while he also believed that Miss Justice knew that he was alone. As for the fool, Alger believed that his behavior as alone was merely a disguise that would ease the discussion. Ever since the ritualistic magic, Alger started using him to address the fool politely. Audrey recalled everything that she heard from various social events. She nodded confidently and said, No problem, but I would need sufficient time to be certain. I can wait. Alger smiled and said, With Mr. Fool as a witness, I believe you wouldn't go back on your promise. Audrey looked towards the quiet yet mysterious fool engulfed in gray fog as the corner of her mouth curved upwards. But I think the value of this information is worth more than both questions put together. When you confirm the answer, I'll provide compensation depending on the situation, Alger replied with an answer he prepared beforehand. Miss Justice, Mr. Hanged Man, do you need virtual currency to determine value? Klein smiled and leaned backwards while he looked at the two people before him. Audrey relaxed and cheered for herself in her mind. Well done. Audrey, you learned how to negotiate. She was so excited that she nearly broke out of her spectator state. She quickly thought of something and asked, Oh right, Mr. Hanged Man, did you receive the 1,000 pounds? I'm sorry, I'm still sailing. I have yet to return to land. Alger wasn't willing to bring it up. He answered her original question. The beyonder that can go through wooden doors and foil locks would probably be Sequence 9 Apprentice. The secret organization, Theosophy Order, has its formula. However, don't ignore the possibility that it was obtained through other channels, such as an ancient tomb of the Fourth Epoch. The Theosophy Order, the secret organization that has countless ties with the Demonist sect. Klein rubbed his chin with his finger leisurely. Seeing that Mr. Fool didn't refute what was said, Audrey couldn't help but sigh. If I had found the formula for Apprentice before, I might not have opted for Spectator. The performance was simply outstanding. Alger didn't bother with Miss Justice's remark but continued his explanation. There is also a sequence potion that is entitled Arbiter. I think you should be familiar with it, because it is the sequence pathway that the Augustus and Fainapotter Kingdom's Castilla family has. Of course, the low sequence formulas were used as rewards in ancient times. Some nobles might have received it before. The Augustus family was a royal family of the Lone Kingdom, while the Castilla family was a royal family in the Fainapotter Kingdom. It turns out that the Augustus family are all arbiters. Audrey was enlightened and felt that it cleared up her suspicion. She sighed and thought, it's no wonder I've always gone along with their arrangements, always uncomfortable, always willing to admit defeat, like I'm never myself when I'm before them. I thought it was because I was timid. The Arbiter has a convincing charm and considerable authority, as well as outstanding combat ability that can deal with the unexpected. Alger described the situation simply. Audrey nodded slowly and leaned backwards. She then spoke elegantly, I have no more questions. Alger thought and looked towards the seat of honor at the long bronze table. Honorable Mr. Fool, I'd like to ask if the true creator's holy residence that the Aurora Order advocates is the legendary Forsaken Land of the Gods? Forsaken Land of the Gods? I have only seen that term once in Roselle's diary. It might be in the secret dockets of the Nighthawks, but it isn't something I can know of currently. How do you want me to answer? Klein nearly twitched the corner of his lips. He considered it for a while, then he replied in a calm tone, "This is not something you should know now." Alger felt his heart tighten, and he immediately lowered his head and replied, "Please forgive me for overstepping my boundaries." Audrey wanted to ask about the forsaken land of the gods, but she also gave up the thought when she heard that. In the lofty divine hall above the gray fog, silence suddenly filled the air. At that moment, Audrey felt that she should say something. "Mr. Fool, and I'm saying if I have the opportunity to join another organization, such as the Psychology Alchemists, is it permitted?" Klein maintained his posture of leaning backward as he said with a chuckle, "That is no problem. My requirement is that the existence of the Tarot Club is not to be exposed. If you become a member of another organization, the materials and information you can use for exchange will also increase." After saying that, he suddenly recalled that he was also a member of another organization. He was a real Nighthawk, while the Hanged Man was most likely related to the Church of the Lord of Storms. Would my Tarot Club be the so-called Rebels Alliance? Traitor Gathering? Klein was drowned in deep thoughts. "I understand now." Audrey was excited, but she immediately thought of a question. "Mr. Fool, if I found a suitable gentleman or lady for this gathering, could I guide them to join? How do I do that?" Alger thought and asked, "Mr. Fool, what is the requirement to be a member of this gathering? How do we determine?" "Ambitious, ethical, cultured, disciplined." 4 words popped into Klein's head instantly. He maintained his silence for a few seconds and only spoke when Justice and Hanged Man appeared a little uneasy. "You can inform me here of people who you find suitable. I will decide if they will join us. Before that, you can't give any hint that would cause the secret of the Tarot Club's existence to be exposed. You must remember, to non-gathering members," Klein paused and said in a heavy voice, "you must not speak my name without my permission." Chapter 115. Cheat, you must not speak my name without my permission. Several minutes after the gathering ended, Audrey and Alger, who had returned to their bedroom and ship respectively, could still hear the words of the Fool reverberating in their ears. Their impression of the mysterious and powerful Mr. Fool was normally relaxed, calm, and unfathomable. It was rare that he would adopt such a stern, supercilious attitude. Because of that, they were exceptionally alarmed. They submitted to his wishes sincerely. They were no strangers to words like that, but these instructions were normally recorded within the Revelation of Evernight or the Book of Storms. In the West Borough of Tingen City, on Daffodil Street, Klein pulled open the curtains and allowed the golden sunlight to pour into his bedroom. He had inspected the star that previously sent out a prayer after Justice and the Hanged Man left, but didn't obtain any information this time round. Since the Crimson Star had the ability to store prayers, akin to sending offline messages, Klein believed that the youth who spoke Jotun hadn't prayed again from the last 2 times he entered the world above the giant. This made him suspect that there was no hope left for the youth's parents, and that the young man had chosen to give up. With his back facing the sunlight, Klein walked to the edge of his bed and laid down. He didn't want to move. He knew that he shouldn't waste any time and head to the Divination Club and continue the process of digesting the potion, but he didn't want to move. He laid silently on his bed, enjoying his rare break. He had a full schedule from Tuesday to Friday, mysticism lessons and practicals in the mornings, shooting and combat training in the afternoons. He was mentally exhausted by the time evening came around. There was no change in his morning routine on Saturday, but he had to guard Cheney's Gate in the afternoon. He would have stayed underground until the dawn of Sunday. Sunday morning was time for Klein to catch up on sleep. In the afternoon, circumstances would determine if he went to the Divination Club. On Monday morning, he had just returned from Koei University in the morning and had the tarot gathering in the afternoon. He also had to think about the issue of acting as a seer. In other words, he had been busy the entire week, with no time to rest. Thus, all Klein wanted to do was laze around, lying on his bed like a loser, not doing anything except daydreaming. No, how can a boss of a cult be so worthless? If Miss Justice and Mr. Hanged Man caught wind of this, their impression of me would shatter. Klein buried his face into his blanket and motivated himself. I have the formula for the clown potion. All I need to do now is fully digest the seer potion. I have the formula to the clown potion. All I need to do now is fully digest the seer potion. He muttered to himself and then propped himself up. Klein took a bronze coin from his pocket and quickly divined if it was suitable for him to head to the club today and got a definitive response. 5, 4, 3, 2. After the countdown, he forced himself to stand up straight and walked over to the clothes rack before picking out his suit and hat. In the meeting room of the Divination Club on Howe Street, Klein sat down in a shaded corner and sipped on his side black tea as he read the Tianjin City Honest paper. There weren't many members around him, just 6 or 7. Just as he was laughing at the grammatical mistake used in a job advertisement, he saw a monocled Glassy walk in with a silk top hat in his hand. There was a blue-dressed lady in her 30s beside him. The lady had curved eyebrows and large yet dull eyes. In her left hand, she was carrying an Intis hat decorated with the feathers of a black swan. That hat is ridiculous. Wouldn't her neck be sore wearing that? Klein noted to himself. He looked over and massaged his glabella, as if alleviating his fatigue. Through his spirit vision, he noticed that Glassy and the lady were both healthy, but were anxious, angry, and flustered. "Good afternoon, Glassy. That Mr. Lenevis wasn't a trustworthy fellow, was he?" Klein asked with a smile, remaining seated. Glassy had asked him for a divination about investing in Lenevis's steel company. Glassy had obtained a negative suggestion. But noticing his indecisiveness, Klein believed that he had taken the risk anyway. Klein hoped the man hadn't invested everything he had. Thus, Klein immediately made the association and judgment when he saw the colors of his emotions. Glassy froze for a moment, then let out a bitter smile. "I truly regret not listening to the suggestion you divined for me. This is the second time I'm saying something like that. Let's hope, no, I believe that there will not be a third time." He turned his head and looked at the lady with some wrinkles. "Madam Christina, look, Mr. Moretti had already guessed our motive for coming here without us even speaking. He is the most magical fortune-teller I have ever seen. I'm more than willing to describe him as a seer." "Good afternoon, Mr. Moretti. We have come here precisely because of Lenevis." Christina gave a simple bow, clearly anxious and flustered. "Shall we head to Topaz?" Glassy was more collected. He pointed to the door of the meeting room with his chin. Klein laughed as he got up. "This is the job of a fortune-teller." He followed the path to the empty Topaz room. Glassy locked the wooden door and walked to his seat while sighing. "Lenevis has gone missing." He gave the excuse of going to the Civilaus County to oversee the excavation and left Tianjin, never to return. "We sent someone to look for him via steam locomotive and discovered that the large-scale steel mine he spoke of only existed on the map. Luckily for me, I recalled your advice and only invested a third of what I initially intended to invest. Otherwise, I would have lost my family and my life." Klein's pupils were darker than usual when he looked at the two people in front of him. He asked, a little curious, "Before making such a major financial decision, wouldn't you choose a representative and ascertain if whatever he said was true at the Hornacis mountain range in the Civilaus County?" Christina responded quickly. "Our representative was fooled by the people Lenevis employed, the place he rented, and the land that was fenced off." Klein didn't question them any further. He maintained his attitude of a seer and asked, "What do you wish to divine today?" "We wish to see if this is salvageable or not," Christina said as she looked at Glassy. Klein took a piece of paper and a fountain pen. "Then let us do an astrolabe divination. I'll ask and you'll answer." Between the questions, Klein marked out the thunderous constellation and the corresponding symbols of various situations before completing the astrolabe. He used more elements in his astrolabe than an ordinary person would have. The method he was going to use to interpret the astrolabe was going to bring him closer to the truth. "Madam, sir, you are now at a crossroad. If you don't restrain yourselves and succumb to your greed and anxiety, you will fall further into the abyss, never being able to free yourselves. But if you can be patient and wait persistently without being greedy, then there will be an opportunity of you seeing the sunlight," Klein said, his tone unhurried. "I understand." Christina nodded. She thought for a moment before saying, Mr. Moretti, can you divine Lenivis's whereabouts? No, I don't think so. The information Lenivis left behind is most likely fake. Even his name might not be real. How can I divine anything? Unless you can give me very specific details, or an item he carries with him all the time, Klein replied truthfully. Christina fell silent for a moment before pushing a one-solely note toward Klein. I have heard from Glassy that you are a true seer, who is respectful and fearful of fate and not greedy for money. You can think of the rest as tips that I am giving to the club. Thank you for your confidence in me. She stood up and bade farewell before leaving quickly. Not greedy for money. No, I am a materialistic man. Klein was regretting his actions of acting as a charlatan. Seeing Christina leave, Glassy closed the door and asked, Is there really no way? I told you the way just now. Klein smiled as he leaned back. Glassy sighed. Lenivis took off with over £10,000 and his victims totaled over 100 people. Luckily for me, I only lost £50. Those were my savings and I have no debt. But Miss Christina invested £150. To her, this is not a sum that she can bear easily. Have you called the police? Klein suddenly felt anger towards the cheat after hearing the sum of £10,000. One could be considered rich even in Backlund with money like that. I don't know if the police would enlist the help of the Nighthawks, mandated punishers, or machinery hive mind for a simple case like this. Klein thought, a little distracted. Glassy nodded and said, We've already made a police report. The police are paying a lot of attention to this case. After much discussion, we're willing to take out a portion of the money we would get back as a reward. One can get £10 as a reward if they manage to provide clues about Lenivis's whereabouts. If you can give a precise location and help the police catch Lenivis, you can get a reward of £100. £10 for a clue? £100 for catching Lenivis? Klein's eyes nearly sparkled after he heard that. His breathing became heavy. He happened to be worrying about how he was going to pay the detective in the future. He could barely afford the second phase of the payment with the extra salary of £3 he received this week, but if the private investigator managed to complete his mission within the next week, then he wouldn't have enough to pay off whatever he promised to pay. He would be lacking a few solely, provided that he wouldn't need to spend his savings elsewhere this week. Perhaps the police will have some items belonging to Lenivis. But they won't be very useful if he's already left Tingen. Klein felt a mixture of excitement and disappointment. In the next hour and a half, Klein got another 2 customers due to Angelica's recommendation. One was a divination for a 1-year-old toddler. Klein immediately drew the corresponding birth astrolabe and explained it, much to the satisfaction of his customer. The other was searching for an item. Klein used tarot reading, coupled with dream divination, to give him a general area. This made his customer very shocked, for he had never seen a fortune teller that could give him such accurate information. Perhaps I could obtain enough funds just by doing divinations for others. Klein, who had received some tips, put on his hat, held his cane, and walked toward the exit of the club. At this moment, he saw Christina enter the club once again with a young girl wearing a sun hat beside her. Christina saw Klein and immediately approached him. She asked softly, Mr. Moretti, you said that you could try divining Lenivis's whereabouts if there was something belonging to him? That is correct. Klein nodded. Christina heaved a sigh of relief and asked in a serious tone, Then is his child something that belongs to him? Klein was momentarily a little lost. Chapter 116. Lenivis's child. Christina didn't notice the seer's blank look. She took a peek at Angelica over at the reception desk, lowered her voice, and said, I mean Lenivis's child. She extended her hand to point at the young lady with the sun hat and said, This is my niece, Megos. Her mother is my elder sister. I'm very sorry and regretful that I thought Lenivis was an outstanding young man back then, and I introduced Megos to Lenivis, who was single. Then they became lovers. Megos' parents were happy with Lenivis at first too. They planned to pour all their savings into the steel company after they got engaged. Luckily, before that happened, Lenivis ran away. Their family didn't encounter any life-threatening losses. Unfortunately, my sister and brother-in-law have to explain to their relatives and friends why the engagement ceremony will be cancelled, and they have to worry about the child that Megos is bearing. We believe in the god of steam and machinery. We are not believers of Lord of Storms. We don't believe in chastity before marriage. We don't blame Megos and even pity her. However, the existence of the child does make things difficult, especially since he has such a father. He took advantage of people both financially and sexually. Klein looked towards Megos, who was standing quietly next to her. He then realized that the lady was quite a beauty. She had a bright forehead, long blonde hair, and a pair of big eyes just like Christina's. She looked depressed yet calm, and her lips were tightly pursed together. What an infuriating swindler, and he even got away successfully. Klein cursed at Lenivis and said after some thought, "If it was a child that is already born, I do have a way to divine Lenivis's whereabouts using the child as an aid. But unfortunately, this would require us to wait a few months." Yes, this might be a reflection of the divination result earlier. Be patient and wait persistent without being greedy, then there will be an opportunity of seeing the sunlight. A few months, Christina mumbled to herself as she shook her head. No, after such a long period of time, even if we find Lenivis, we wouldn't be able to get back our money. She looked sideways at Megos. Her voice lowered unconsciously as she asked, "Do you have anything that Lenivis carried around before?" "No," Megos answered clearly yet gently. "Would the ring he gave me count? It must be something that he carried for a very long time." Klein shook his head. Christina remained silent for a while and looked at Megos when she said, "You have to make a decision. I think keeping this child would make your future tough and thorny. Are you going to tell him that his father was a swindler and took away many people's money, including his mother's? Time to head to the clinic, to the hospital. Plus, this could help us to find Lenivis, to get what we lost." Hey, isn't such divination a little hardcore? It was not Klein's place to involve himself in the family matters of others. So, he could only wait patiently by the side as he lampooned inwardly from time to time. Megos lowered her head and looked down. She didn't speak for quite a while. Then, she touched her stomach and revealed a gentle smile. He is different from his father. He will be a considerate and likable child. He will kick me lightly every day, telling me his mood. He will even hum a song, whistle and use music to help me sleep. Klein heard and suddenly felt something amiss. The former part of what Megos said seemed to be normal, but the latter part was like the ravings of a madwoman. Did she have a mental problem due to the incident? Klein raised his right hand to his glabella. He pretended to massage it to ease his weariness. Just then, Megos suddenly turned around and walked towards the door, leaving only one sentence. Maybe his father will come back in secret after he is born, keeping a part of the money for his child. Klein never expected she would respond like that, and he was momentarily taken aback that he forgot to activate his spirit vision. Then, he watched helplessly as Megos left the club and walked down the stairs. Christina let out a sigh and said, "Sorry, Mr. Moretti. Sorry to bother you. We will look for one of Lenivis's personal items that he carried with him all the time." Klein nodded indiscernibly. He watched her walk downstairs and sighed as he shook his head. The next morning, Klein entered Blackthorn Security Company, greeted Roseanne and asked, "Where's today's newspaper?" The sweet brown-haired girl rose and sized him up and said, puzzled, "Klein, you're so weird." "Why?" Klein asked in reply, smiling. Roseanne rolled her eyes and said, "You always read the newspapers during noon break because you have mysticism lessons in the morning. Old Neil is already waiting for you in the armory. I found out earlier that there would be a case offering a reward, so I want to read the newspaper to memorize the criminal's appearance. Perhaps I might one day come across the person?" Klein explained with a smile. "Is that so?" Roseanne picked up the day's newspapers and started flipping through them out of curiosity. "Wanted Lenivis, right?" Klein immediately answered, "Yes. Yes." "Wicked swindler. He stole about 10,000 pounds. Roseanne read carefully for nearly 20 seconds before cursing suddenly in rage. Klein shared the same feeling. "It's really ridiculous. Even I want to apply to take over the case." Roseanne continued to read and shook her head regretfully. The case doesn't seem to involve supernatural factors. Even if it did, it would be passed to mandated punishers under the Lord of Storms. Klein didn't quite understand what Rosen meant, but after he took the newspaper and read it, he sighed. Yeah, there were so many people cheated. There must be believers from all three major churches, and Lenevis's steelwork company was said to be located in the south. If a case was related to supernatural factors and involved only the believer of one God, it would be passed to the corresponding team. However, if it involved believers of the Evernight Goddess, Lord of Storms, and the God of Steam and Machinery, it would be assigned based on jurisdiction area. The Nighthawks controlled the Golden Indus Borough, the North Borough, and the West Borough. The mandated punishers controlled the East Borough, South Borough, and the port, while the Machinery Hive Mind Troop was responsible for the university and suburb areas. As he flipped through the newspapers, Klein memorized Lenevis's appearance. He had a plump forehead, black hair, brown eyes, and a pair of spectacles with almost round lenses. He smirked faintly, looking as though he was mocking everyone. Besides that pair of spectacles, Lenevis didn't seem to have any obvious traits, and looked really ordinary. He chatted with Rose and casually then passed through the partition, in preparation to head underground. Then he saw the pale and cold corpse collector Fry and the white-haired black-eyed author Sika Tron exiting the entertainment room and turning towards him. After a simple greeting, Klein watched his two teammates leave and discovered Dunn Smith in a black windbreaker standing by the side of the door he opened. "There's a case?" Klein asked curiously. At that time of day, there wouldn't be two Nighthawks heading out together for no reason. Dunn looked over with his gray eyes. He nodded and smiled. "There seems to be a paranormal incident in West Borough. I've sent Sika and Fry to check on it, but you don't have to worry about that. Until you master combat techniques, I don't intend to send you on any missions. I have to take responsibility for my team members. Captain, you are such a nice person. Besides the receding hairline and bad memory, you are flawless." Klein complimented inwardly. He asked for confirmation. In other words, I only need to attend mysticism classes and combat training. I don't have to contribute anything, and I can still get my pay? This is only temporary, Dunn confirmed. I only need to attend classes and work out, and I'll get an ample paycheck. It's great just thinking about it. Klein thought happily. I hope there are no more coincidences. He prayed in silence. The days passed by peacefully until Friday. Klein completed his combat training and took a carriage back to Bisick Street. Outside Henry's private detective company, he looked to the left and to the right. Confirmed that no one was watching him, he put on the gauze mask, lifted up the collar of his windbreaker, and quickly entered the stairway. Knocking on the door, Klein saw the middle-aged brawny man, Detective Henry, again. "Good afternoon, sir. One of the cases that you entrusted us with is done." The deep blue-eyed Detective Henry spoke with a hoarse voice from drinking and smoking. Klein intentionally lowered his voice and said, "Is it the information of the man that appeared at the Evil Dragon bar? The man that bought the Spectator Potion's supplementary ingredients?" "Yes." Henry waved his smoking pipe. Then, he didn't say anything but look at Klein with a smile. Klein understood what the man meant, and he took out 4 one-pound notes and handed it over. "This is the second payment." He paused and added, "Write me a receipt." His private stash of money had been reduced to less than £1. "No problem." Henry coughed. He checked the anti-counterfeiting marks on the notes as he instructed his staff to bring over pen and paper. Then, he beckoned to Klein for him to have a seat while he quickly wrote a receipt and stamped a seal on the bottom. After completing everything, Henry took a puff at his pipe and said, "According to your description, my assistant and I waited at the Evil Dragon bar for 3 days before finally meeting that man. He's quite an alert gentleman, and is good at observation. Thankfully, we're experienced. His name is Dax Terguderian, a doctor of the Green Hill Mental Asylum." Chapter 117. Contact Dax Terguderian, a doctor of the Green Hill Mental Asylum. Klein silently repeated what the detective had said and started to think about the ways he could interact with this doctor whom he suspected to be a spectator from the Psychology Alchemists. He didn't want to take too much of a risk on this matter. He didn't want the Nighthawks to discover that he was problematic. He didn't want to lose the life he had now over a mere exchange of information and resources. Furthermore, this person was most probably a spectator. Anyone who hadn't undergone special training wouldn't be able to hide their motives and thoughts from a person like that. I'll get a proxy, making me appear a little more mysterious? No, the more people involved, the easier it is for there to be problems. Yes, perhaps I can hide the truth within the truth. I'll let that doctor know of my thoughts and feelings through my expression and body language, but not the whole truth. As Detective Henry described Daxter Guderian, Klein thought about what methods he could use to minimize risk without affecting the results he wanted. Slowly, he found inspiration in a detective film he had once seen. Well, I can try that, but I'll have to practice it repeatedly. Klein nodded inwardly before directing his full concentration on what Detective Henry had to say. Henry cleared his throat and said, "We are still working on the request involving the red chimney. You should know that there are many buildings in Tingen that have similar characteristics. Of course, it would be much easier if you could provide us with more clues." Klein laughed dryly. "I wouldn't have had to make the request if I had more clues." Honestly, this long investigation had depressed him, for the person behind the scenes had obviously noticed Klein's divinations and had more than enough time to find another hideout. Thus, all he could do was hope that he could find relevant clues from the information of the tenants. And that alone cost £7. Just the thought of it made him feel the pinch. Klein grabbed his cane and left after Detective Henry finished his report. At 20 minutes to 9 on a Saturday morning, in an office of the Green Hill Mental Asylum, Daxter Guderian, who was wearing gold-rimmed spectacles, removed his jacket and hat and hung them on the clothes rack. He had just picked up his tin of coffee powder when he heard knocking on the door. "Please come in," Daxter said casually. The half-closed door opened, and a young man wearing a black windbreaker entered. Daxter didn't recognize the person that walked in, so he asked, puzzled, "Good morning, you are?" Klein closed the door, took off his hat, and pressed it against his chest before bowing. "Good morning, Dr. Daxt. Please forgive me for taking the liberty to visit without any warning. I am Probationary Inspector Klein Moretti of the Alwa Police Department. These are my identification documents and badge." "Inspector?" Daxter muttered softly as he received Klein's identification documents and badge. "Special Operations Department." He looked up slowly, his eyes calm, as if he was scrutinizing something. Short black hair, pupils slightly darker than brown, a scholarly aura, no ill intent at the moment. Daxter returned the items and pointed to the chair on the other side of the table. "Please have a seat, officer. How might I assist you?" Klein sat down and placed his cane to the side. He slowly put away his documents and badge, then smiled. "Please allow me to reintroduce myself. I am also a member of Tingen City's Nighthawk Squad, specializing in dealing with incidents involving the supernatural." "Good morning, Mr. Spectator." Before he finished his sentence, he wasn't surprised to see Daxter's pupils constrict. Daxter retracted his hand, looking like he was about to escape. "Officer, I don't understand what you mean." Daxter forced out a few words, almost unable to maintain his form. "I don't like jokes like this. Perhaps I should call security." Klein slowly took out his revolver from his armpit holster, his smile unchanging. "Mr. Daxter, I know that you can see my confidence and that I do not have any ill intent." Honestly speaking, I wasn't too sure myself, but your reaction gave me the answer I needed. Every sentence I said just now is true," Klein added in his heart. Daxter relaxed slightly, his gaze shooting toward the revolver. He asked, confused, "I find it hard to understand why you came looking for me." "I don't think that I revealed anything," Klein laughed and replied. "It was just a coincidence, or perhaps fate wanted us to meet. We ran into each other once in the underground market at Evil Dragon Bar, but you didn't notice me back then. You were smart to purchase the supplementary ingredients for the potion first, but since I am familiar with that formula, you caught my attention." Daxter suddenly exhaled, as if he just lost the motivation to defend himself. I thought I was careful enough to think that. After muttering to himself, he looked into Klein's eyes and said, "Officer, I know that you're not here to arrest me. What is your true motive for being here? With a relaxed expression, Klein said, I am different from the other Nighthawks. I don't believe that Beyonders not within our ranks are criminals in the making. This is not fair to those who adhere to the law. Daxter changed his posture. He loosened up and said, the world would be at peace if the other Nighthawks, mandated punishers, and machinery hive mind acted like you. You know of other members from the Nighthawks, mandated punishers, and machinery hive mind? Klein feigned surprise. This is not something a person who became a Beyonder by mistake should know. There must be an organization behind you. He leaned back and said with a smile, Psychology alchemists? He casually watched Daxter's expression contort as he said those words. I could see that you were anticipating my answer, yet I still missed the bait and fell into your linguistic trap, Daxter said in frustration. He started to notice that the spectator state wasn't omnipotent. He could tell why the other party was here, but it didn't mean he understood the specifics. Klein stroked the cylinder of his revolver and said, Doctor, we need to have an honest conversation. That can start with me. I don't believe that Beyonders not under management are potential criminals, but I agree that every Beyonder must be registered and monitored. This is a precaution against the risk of Beyonders losing control. It's to avoid the occurrence of something even more dangerous. I won't disrupt your normal life, but I hope that there can be limited cooperation between us. Limited cooperation? Daxter asked as if thinking about something. Klein let out a soft chuckle. Yes, limited. For example, tell me about your condition regularly. You should know that it is possible to save someone who has not completely lost control yet, and the Nighthawks have considerable experience in this regard. Or, if you could give me clues of a Beyonder you know or a Beyonder in your organization who is about to do something that can endanger the innocent. Or, if you would like to exchange something for items that you could make more use of. This is a perk I am giving you. You should know what perks mean. Also, you need not worry about being suddenly prosecuted by members of the Nighthawks, mandated punishers, or machinery hive mind one day. You can live your life in joy and stability. We will give you something you can use to prove your identity. You can use it when you have no other options left. Daxter listened on silently. It was a while before he said, You want me to betray my organization? No, not betray, Klein said sincerely. This is the protection of justice, morals, and kindness. You are stopping something evil, merciless, and bloody. Other than that, I wouldn't ask you to betray the secrets of the organization you are in. Daxter thought for a moment, as if feeling better now that there was an excuse. He was silent for a few seconds before he extended his right hand. Here's to a successful cooperation. Klein shook his hand with his free hand and said, A successful cooperation. He paused for a moment before chuckling. Doctor, can you now tell me if you are a member of the Psychology Alchemists? Yes. Daxter nodded. Klein, who hadn't deactivated his spirit vision since he entered, didn't see any changes in the colors of his emotions. Thus he asked discreetly, How did you join the Psychology Alchemists? Daxter looked into his eyes and said, I discovered that there was a patient of this asylum who could see right through me when I was tending to him. His clear mind was nothing like a lunatic. His name is Hudyugen. Klein committed the name to memory and chatted with Daxter a little longer, deciding on a secret way to communicate and meet up. He didn't exchange matters regarding potions, formulas, and rumors for the time being. At an appropriate moment, he bade farewell and put away his revolver before leaving Daxter's office. Daxter exhaled after he saw Klein's back disappear from his field of vision. He slumped into his chair, feeling a little agonized and little relaxed. 36 Zutland Street. Inside Blackthorn's security company. Seated behind his desk, Dunn swept the area with his gray eyes and asked, What happened? Klein, who was late by about half an hour, organized his thoughts and said, Captain, I found a Beyonder and confirmed that he is a member of the Psychology Alchemists. He's an orthodox doctor and is willing to cooperate with us. I think it's best to maintain the status quo. He could help us learn more about the current condition of the Association of Psychological Alchemy. After pausing for a few seconds, Klein added, I want to develop him into an informant for the Nighthawks, or a hidden external member. The word informant came from the Intis language. It was created by the Emperor Roselle. Dunn nodded slowly and said, "You handled the situation well, but it would be best to inform me when you face such a situation in the future. Give me that doctor's information and a written account of the way you handled the situation. I will give him something he can use to prove his identity. Also, don't speak of this to Leonard and the rest. Even though they are trustworthy teammates, the protocol clearly requires us to keep this close. You will be in charge of contacting that doctor in the future?" Klein exhaled silently and replied with a smile, "All right." Chapter 118. August time flew by and Tingen bade farewell to the end of summer. The temperature hovered between 26 and 27 degrees Celsius. Klein stood up from the bathtub and took a stride forward, sending water droplets to the floor. He stood there naked, looking down at his abs. He flexed and saw prominent muscle lines appear. That was the result of his daily training. Besides, he appeared a lot more energetic. And just today, his combat teacher, Gawain, had started teaching him the basic footwork for punching and the techniques for delivering force. Klein stepped on the floor barefooted in the bathroom, either sliding forward or retreating before dodging to the right and swinging his fist while he made a defensive gesture. Phew! He stopped and let out a breath happily. He took the towel next to him and wiped himself down. After getting in touch with Daxter Guderian, the doctor in the mental asylum, Klein seemed to escape from coincidences for 2 whole weeks. Without the constant barrage of supernatural incidents, his life became stable. He received his paycheck on time, researched mysticism in depth, trained his marksmanship and fighting skills, developed new cooking recipes, slowly gathered decent utensils and decorations with Benson and Melissa, asked his teammates about supernatural cases in the past, divined for people who came to the club, and strictly followed the principles he figured out. That made him more stable. If it wasn't for the late nights in which he still missed Earth, the red chimney that had yet to be uncovered, or the misfortune cloth puppet's picture that still appeared in his dreams occasionally, he would have started getting used to his current life and think of it affectionately. During that time, 3 tarot club gatherings were convened, but Klein didn't receive any new pages of Roselle's diary. However, according to Justice's explanation, she had gotten to know 2 Beyonders and she was getting in touch with them consistently. When she got into their circle of acquaintances, it was likely that she could trade for more pages of Roselle's diary. The Hanged Man also expressed that he had returned to land and was dealing with some matters. He would begin looking for more as soon as he had more free time. Besides, Justice felt that the 2 Beyonders whom she knew were potential targets to join the gathering. They both had decent identities as cover, with certain but different channels of information, as well as principles and unique characteristics. They were not the kind of people that would sell out a secret. The only problem was that they were only Sequence 9 Beyonders, which wasn't too suitable for a high-end secret organization like the Tarot Club. High-end secret organization? Sounds more like a pyramid scheme. Klein only let out a heavy sigh to cover up the fact that he was at a loss for words to reply to Miss Justice's complacency. He could only agree to observe the 2 Beyonders further. Of course, Justice wasn't the innocent and romantic maiden from before. She kept her guard up and never mentioned the names and traits of the 2 Beyonders. She was afraid that the Hanged Man would be able to identify her through that. Miss Justice said that she clearly feels the signs of the potion digesting. She might need another 3 to 4 weeks until she completes her acting as a spectator. My scheduled acquisition of the telepathist formula has to be brought forward. Klein threw aside the towel that he used to dry himself and put on his clothes as he thought about the Tarot Club from the day before. In the last 20 days, he had only met Daxter Guderian once. He had the idea of haste makes waste, so he merely chatted about the doctor's state and asked unimportant matters about the psychology alchemists. Given the speed with which Justice was digesting the potion, he had no choice but to begin thinking about how to get the formula of Sequence 8 telepathist from Daxter earlier. Klein buttoned his shirt and took another dry towel to wrap around his head to absorb the water in his hair. Compared to Justice, he was digesting the seer potion even faster than expected. By this week, the sounds that he shouldn't hear and things that he shouldn't see had already vanished while engaging in cogitation or spirit vision. Flipping over the towel, Klein dried his hair again. He lifted his head to look at the door and muttered to himself, "The seer principles that I've figured out are really efficient. Next week, I should be able to digest the potion entirely by next week. I have no idea where to get the single horn of a matured Hornaceous gray mountain goat and a complete stalk of a human-faced rose required by the clown formula. Maybe I could do as Lady Daly did and send in a special application? But that would definitely attract the attention of the higher-ups, and I want to develop at my own pace. The believer from the Aurora Order in the police department was found too, but I have yet to find out who this Mr. Z is. Henry said that he would complete the red chimney task before the end of this week. My private stash of money has returned to slightly more than £7, so at least I don't have to worry about making the final payment. Some of the information on houses and tenants that he provided before didn't seem to have any abnormalities, but I have no time to investigate them one by one. Perhaps I could see which red chimney houses have gotten new tenants recently? That's one way to look at it. Sitting silently for another half a minute, he put on his black trousers, bow tie, and armpit holster. He then picked up his sweaty night training suit from the floor and tossed it into the laundry basket. He opened the door and exited the bathroom. He had just finished his Wednesday afternoon combat training, and he was still at his teacher Gawain's place. "Hello, Mr. Moretti." Gawain's maidservant happened to pass by, and she quickly bowed. Klein nodded slightly and pointed at the messy bathroom. "Could you clean this up, please?" "Of course, sir. The clothes will be taken care of by the laundry maid. She'll come over at 6. The maidservant held her head low when she answered. Laundry maids had no accommodation or food included, so they weren't hired by only one household. They were normally contracted to handle the laundry from several households. Either they rushed around daily, washing one household's clothes before going to the next, or they would gather all the clothes from different households and take care of it all at the same time, before sending it all back. Only then could they barely make a living. Klein didn't say much but returned to the living room to bid farewell to the owner who was sitting on the rocking chair. He saw Gawain nodding lethargically, a light brown blanket covering his legs and the Alwa Evening News in his hands. Klein knew for a fact that the gentleman bathing in the setting sun's glow was in his early 50s, but his listlessness made him seem like he was already in his 80s. During combat training, Gawain maintained silence and only gave pointers when he needed to. He wasn't one for casual chatting. Klein was so exhausted from the daily training that he had no intention of trying to engage in conversation. Thus, their relationship remained distant. From his demonstrations, Teacher Gawain's strength is still quite terrifying, and his steps are swift too. I reckon it wouldn't be a problem for him to fight 3 of me. He has the pay from the police station, and he also bought a plot of land in a village out in the Tingen suburbs that provides a fixed rental. He hires a chef, a maidservant, and a laundry maiden. In the foodaholic empire on Earth, a man in his 50s with such wealth would have been traveling the world. Klein looked away from Gawain and shook his head. Then, he went to the clothes rack to take down his top hat and black windbreaker. After he tidied himself up, he took his cane and exited the house. He walked along the weed-covered stone path towards the gates. Just then, he saw that there was a 2-wheeled carriage stopped outside the metal fence, and there was a man with a familiar face standing next to it. "Leonard," Klein muttered, looking suspiciously towards his messy-haired Nighthawk's teammate. Leonard was dressed in a white shirt, black trousers, and buttonless leather boots as he twirled his hat in his hands. When he saw Klein come out from the house, he smiled and asked, "Are you pleasantly surprised?" "Only surprise, without any joy." Klein ignored Leonard's inappropriate behavior and looked into the fake poet's green eyes. "What happened?" Leonard put on his hat and said, "Captain wants you to work with me and Fry. Let's talk about it on the way." "All right." Klein followed him into the carriage. As the scene outside of the carriage flew past, Leonard took up the document bag by his side and threw it at Klein. Klein caught it steadily and took out a document. He then started reading carefully. August 11th, 11 p.m., at a workhouse in Westborough, the bankrupt Salas attempted arson to cause a tragedy. But in the end, he only managed to burn himself to death. August 11th, 10 p.m., harbor worker Zid jumped into the Tussock River and ended his poverty-stricken life. August 11th, 8 p.m., in Iron Cross Street's Lower Street, Mrs. Lawis, who earned a living by selling matchboxes, died of a sudden disease. Klein was puzzled when he read the first two incidents. He found the deaths very ordinary and common. Not only should it have been beneath the attention of the Nighthawks, even the police force would avoid wasting resources looking into such obvious causes of death. However, when he read down the list, he slowly creased his eyebrows. After 2 pages, he suddenly lifted his head and looked at Leonard. Isn't this too many? When the number of ordinary deaths reached a staggering amount, it was difficult to call it normal. For once, Leonard nodded seriously and said, "The number of death incidents within the past 2 weeks are 5 times the normal rate." When the Tianjin Police Headquarters tabulated the data, they realized the problem and quickly passed it over to us, as well as the mandated punishers and the machinery hive mind. Although these death incidents appeared normal during initial investigations, Captain believes we should investigate them once more. It might require the help of divination or ritualistic magic. Klein said with a look of enlightenment, "I understand." Leonard snapped his fingers and said, "You, me, and Fry are in a team. He's waiting for us at Iron Cross Street's Lower Street. Sika, Royale, and Old Neil are in another team, investigating corresponding incidents in the North Borough. Captain is staying in the security company to respond to any emergencies." Okay. Klein nodded solemnly and suddenly thought of something. He quickly asked, "Can I drop by my place and leave a note?" He had to tell his brother and sister that he couldn't dine at home that night because something has cropped up. Leonard laughed. "No problem, it's on the way." With that, Klein calmed down and read over the death incidents again, intending to find a link among the various names, times, and causes of death. Then he suddenly realized something. Is this my first group mission after becoming a Nighthawk? You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.